Chapter 1. The official slogan for Harmony Creek, Missouri was the hidden gem of the Ozarks. Maxine Harper had a few alternate suggestions. Where gravity is more of a guideline, for one, or perhaps home of the perpendicular driveway. Her personal favorite, which she was currently muttering under her breath as two burly men sweated profusely on her lawn, was Harmony Creek, we hope you have good brakes. Her new home, a two-bedroom mobile home of indeterminate vintage, clung to the side of a steep hill like a nervous barnacle. It wasn't much, but after 5 years in Tanner Baldwin's sterile glass and chrome condo overlooking the Lake of the Ozarks, this slightly lopsided box with 5 acres of untamed woods felt like a kingdom. It was hers. The mortgage was hers, the peeling paint was hers, and the imminent danger of her brand new washing machine becoming an unguided 200-pound missile was apparently also hers. "Ma'am, I don't know about this," said the larger of the two delivery men, a guy named Dale whose sweat-stained t-shirt read Big D's Delivery. His partner, a scrawny kid who looked about 16, was valiantly trying to keep the dolly and the gleaming white Kenmore upon it from beginning its high-speed descent into the lush valley below. "Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the grand finale of Max Harper's Life Choices," Max's internal stand-up comedian chimed in, taking the stage in her mind. Tonight's episode, Appliance Avalanche. She traded a waterfront view for a life-or-death struggle with a major appliance. Was it worth it? Stick around for the credits, where we'll list all her therapists. The thought was so absurdly on point that a snort of laughter escaped her. Dale and the kid shot her a look that was equal parts confusion and alarm. "Sorry," she said, waving a hand dismissively, as if that explained anything. "Just thinking about the spin cycle. It's very powerful on this model." Dale grunted, clearly unconvinced. "The problem ain't the spin cycle, ma'am. It's the angle of attack here. One slip, and your washer is going to be a modern art installation in that creek down there." Max winced. He was right. Her driveway was less a driveway and more a gravel-strewn launch ramp. She'd managed to get her little Hyundai up it, but a heavy-duty delivery truck was out of the question. They'd been forced to park on the narrow county road and haul everything up by hand. The refrigerator was a nightmare. The sofa had nearly caused a mutiny, and now the washing machine was staging a final, defiant protest. "This is a metaphor, you know," her inner voice continued, adopting a snooty academic tone. "The precarious appliance represents the fragile state of your newfound independence. Its potential downward trajectory symbolizes the gravitational pull of your past, threatening to drag you back into the valley of despair and bad relationships." "Oh, shut up," she whispered to herself. "Ma'am?" the skinny kid asked, his knuckles white on the dolly's handle. "Nothing, just giving myself a pep talk. We can do this," she chirped, trying to project a confidence she was about 1,000,000 miles from feeling. Her phone buzzed in the pocket of her jeans. She ignored it. It buzzed again, insistent. With a sigh, she fished it out. The screen lit up with a name that made the pit of her stomach clench. Tanner. Of course, it was a Tuesday, Tanner's day, to remind her what a mess she'd made of her life since leaving him. Her thumb hovered over the decline button, a tiny act of rebellion. But then she remembered the quarterly reports she still had to finalize and the fact that he was a minority owner in the construction company where she worked as a bookkeeper. Declining his call wasn't just personal, it could be professional suicide. The tension was the point. He'd made sure of that. Escape was an illusion, as long as her paycheck had his company's name on it. "1 second," she said to the delivery guys, her voice tight. She stepped a few feet away, turning her back to them, and answered. "Hello, Tanner." "Maxine." His voice was smooth, like expensive whiskey that leaves a bitter aftertaste. "Just calling to see how you're enjoying life in the sticks. Have the raccoons carried off your silverware yet?" Tonight's opening act, the ex-boyfriend. He's condescending, he's possessive, and he thinks negging is a love language. Give him a lukewarm round of applause, folks. Everything is fine, Tanner. I was just busy. Busy with what? Tilling the potato patch? I saw the charge for Ozark Appliance Barn come through on the old joint account. You forgot to take me off, you know. Buying a washing machine? How quaint. I guess you can't just send your laundry out when you live in a tin can on a hill. Each word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to prick her insecurities. For years, it had worked. He'd chipped away at her until her confidence was a pile of dust. This inner comedy routine of hers had been born in the silence of his condo, a desperate defense mechanism against his emotional warfare. I needed a washer, Tanner, and it's a mobile home, not a tin can. Whatever you need to call it to sleep at night, honey. There was a pause. She could practically hear him swirling a drink in a crystal glass. I just wanted to make sure you hadn't forgotten about the Henderson projections. Bob wants them by Friday, and I expect them to be perfect. No country living distractions. They'll be done, she said, her teeth grinding. Bob Henderson, the majority owner, was a decent man. Tanner used him as a shield, a way to exert control over her at work. Good. Don't want you getting too comfortable out there. People might think you're capable on your own. The line went dead. Max squeezed her eyes shut, a familiar wave of shame and anger washing over her. She was 35 years old, and she still let him talk to her like that. She was the one who didn't stand up for herself, but she'd once leveled a 6'4" trucker with a blistering tirade for cutting in front of a senior citizen at the Piggly Wiggly. It made no sense. A loud grunt from Dale snapped her back to the present. The washing machine had lurched. The skinny kid yelped as the dolly's wheels slid a few inches in the loose gravel. I'm losing it, Dale. Just hold on. Max shoved her phone back in her pocket and rushed forward. What can I do? Get in front of it, Dale grunted, his face a mask of crimson strain. If it goes, maybe you can, I don't know, soften the blow? Brilliant plan, Dale. Throw the 115-pound woman in front of the 200-pound metal box. It's the new Ozark braking system. Despite the absurdity, she scrambled in front of the dolly, planting her sneakers and pressing her hands against the cold enamel of the machine. It was like trying to stop a glacier. The whole contraption was groaning, vibrating, slowly but surely surrendering to physics. This was it. This was her new life. An endless, uphill battle, literally. Tears of frustration pricked at her eyes. She'd escaped Tanner's emotional prison only to be crushed by her own Kenmore. The sheer, tragicomic irony of it all bubbled up in her chest and burst out as a half-sob, half-guffaw. She was laughing, actually laughing, with tears streaming down her face while trying to stop a major appliance from launching itself into the next county. It was at that precise moment that a dusty, dark blue Ford F-150 slowed to a stop on the road. The driver's side window rolled down and a man leaned out. He wore a faded St. Louis Cardinals baseball cap, and a friendly, slightly bewildered grin played on his lips. "Evening, ladies," he said, his voice a calm, pleasant baritone that seemed utterly out of place in their chaos. "Looks like you're in a bit of a pickle." He was tall, she could tell, even with him sitting, and lean in the way of men who worked outside. Sandy blonde hair peeked out from under his cap, a few weeks past needing a trim. But it was his eyes that caught her, a warm hazel color that crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "We're fine," Max squeaked, which was such a blatant lie it was almost funny. The washer chose that exact moment to slide another 6 inches, dragging all 3 of them with it. The man in the truck needed another invitation. He put the truck in park, hopped out, and jogged up the drive. He was even taller than she thought, with a solid, capable presence that immediately made her feel a little less doomed. "Here," he said, easily shouldering his way between Max and the skinny kid. "You two get on the sides. I'll take the front. On 3, we're going to try to heave it back up onto that patch of level ground." He pointed to a small, grassy shelf about 4 feet up the slope. "Who are you?" Dale panted. "Just a guy who doesn't want to see a brand new washer go for a swim," he replied with that easy grin. He looked at Max, his hazel eyes locking with hers. For a second, the world seemed to stop its frantic tilt. "You ready?" Max nodded, her heart doing a weird little stutter step. He smelled like sawdust and fresh air. "Okay, 1, 2, 3. With a collective roar of effort, they pushed. The man, the stranger, was incredibly strong. He took the brunt of the weight, his muscles straining under his worn t-shirt. The dolly's wheels bit into the gravel, held, and then, inch by agonizing inch, began to move upward. They heaved again, and with a final shuddering groan, the washing machine was on the level patch of grass. Safe. They all collapsed, panting. Dale leaned against a tree. The skinny kid lay flat on his back, staring at the sky. Max just stood there, her legs trembling, staring at the stranger. "Thank you," she breathed, swiping at the tear tracks on her cheeks. It was no problem at all," he said, wiping a dusty hand on his jeans. He looked from her to the precariously perched mobile home, then back to the washer. "Gotta say, I admire the ambition." And there it was again, that ridiculous bubble of laughter. It burst out of her, louder this time, a full-throated peal of pure, unadulterated relief and hysteria. The stranger just watched her, his head tilted. He wasn't looking at her like she was crazy. He was looking at her with genuine, open curiosity. When her laughter finally subsided into hiccups, she felt the need to explain. It was a compulsion. "I'm sorry," she gasped, wiping her eyes. "It's just, my ex-boyfriend just called to tell me what a terrible life choice it was to move out here, and then my brand new washing machine, which is supposed to be this symbol of my clean new start, tried to commit suicide by launching itself off a cliff. It's just a lot of symbolism for a Tuesday." His friendly grin widened into a full, genuine smile that lit up his entire face. "Sounds like you've had one heck of a day." He stuck out his hand. "I'm Rowan Jacobs." "Max Harper," she said, taking his hand. His palm was calloused and warm, and his grip was firm. A jolt, small but definite, shot up her arm. "Well, hello there, Mr. Tall, Helpful, and Smells Like a Forest. The plot, and possibly my laundry situation, thickens." "Well, Max Harper," Rowan said, his eyes twinkling, "let's get your suicidal washing machine inside before it gets any more ideas." It took another 15 minutes of careful maneuvering, but with Rowan's help, they got the machine onto the small porch and through the door. Dale and the kid, eternally grateful, hooked it up in record time, got her signature, and practically fled before any other appliances could make a break for it, leaving Max and Rowan standing in her small, cluttered living room. An awkward silence fell between them, filled only by the hum of the refrigerator. "So," she said, wringing her hands, "can I offer you a water or a beer? I think I have a beer. It might be from the previous owner, though, so it could be a vintage 2018 Bud Light." He chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. "I'm good, thanks. I should probably get going anyway." He walked to the door, then paused on the threshold, turning back to her. He unconsciously reached up and turned his Cardinals cap around backwards on his head, a gesture that seemed both boyish and thoughtful. "You know, this is a beautiful piece of land. That valley view is something else." "It's the main reason I bought it," she admitted. "The view, not the death trap driveway." "You made a good choice," he said, his voice sincere. He looked at her then, a long, appraising look that didn't feel invasive, but interested. It made her feel seen in a way she hadn't in years. "Really?" A blush crept up her neck. "Thank you, Rowan, for everything. You were literally a lifesaver, or at least a washer saver." "Anytime." He gave a small nod and started to turn away, then stopped again as if remembering something. "I'm actually in the area for business. I'm a land developer. Been looking at a few parcels around Harmony Creek." "Oh, that's nice," Max said, unsure what else to say. He put his cap back on, forwards this time, and gave her one last smile. "Yeah, I've got a meeting in town tomorrow morning." Trying to finalize a deal. He took a step off the porch. "Got a meeting with Bob Henderson." The name hit Max like a physical blow. Bob Henderson. her boss, the man Tanner used as a professional cudgel against her. Her mind, which had been filled with the pleasant, woodsy scent of Rowan Jacobs and the warmth of his hazel eyes, went completely and utterly silent. The internal stand-up comedian packed up her microphone and fled the stage. All that was left was a single, sharp, echoing question. What in the world was this handsome, helpful stranger doing meeting with the owner of the company her ex-boyfriend was trying to ruin her life with? Chapter 2. The silence in the small living room was no longer awkward. It was a vacuum, sucking all the warmth and air out of the space. The friendly sawdust and sunshine man standing on her porch was suddenly a question mark, a variable in an equation she didn't know how to solve. Bob Henderson. Of all the names in all the small towns in all of Missouri, he had to say that one. "Well, folks, that's our show for tonight," Max's internal comedian announced from somewhere in the nosebleed section of her brain, her voice tinny and distant. "Our handsome hero has just revealed he's having brunch with the villain's boss. Will he join the dark side? Does the dark side offer a 401k? Tune in next week for more Betrayal by a Baseball Cap." The comedian's voice lacked its usual punch. It sounded as hollow as Max felt. Rowan was still looking at her, his friendly grin faltering slightly at the edges as he registered the complete shutdown of her expression. The laughter that had filled the room moments before had evaporated, leaving behind a chilly residue. Her face, which had been flushed with relief and amusement, was now a carefully blank mask. "Bob Henderson?" she repeated, her voice flat. "Of Henderson Construction?" "That's the one," Rowan said, his brow furrowing in confusion at her tone. "Good man. We've been talking for a couple of months now. Do you know him?" "Do I know him?" Max's mind screamed. "Oh, I know him. I know the exact decibel level of his snores after the annual company Christmas party, because Tanner insisted I drive him home. I know he takes his coffee with 2 creams and a Splenda. I know that his signature is the only thing standing between me and unemployment at the hands of my emotionally abusive ex. So yeah, you could say we're acquainted." "He's my boss," she said out loud, the words tasting like ash. Rowan's eyes widened in surprise. "Well, what do you know? Small world." He shifted his weight, suddenly seeming as uncomfortable as she felt. The easy camaraderie between them had vanished, replaced by a thick, thorny hedge of suspicion. I didn't realize." "No, why would you?" she said, wrapping her arms around herself. It was a defensive posture, a physical manifestation of her walls slamming back into place. "Well, good luck with your meeting." It was a dismissal, and they both knew it. The warm, capable stranger who had saved her washing machine was gone. In his place was a potential business associate of the men who controlled her livelihood. A complication, a threat. "Max, wait," Rowan started, taking a half step back onto the porch. He turned his cap backwards on his head, the unconscious gesture a stark reminder of the thoughtful man she'd seen just minutes before. "Did I say something wrong?" She wanted to scream. Everything. She wanted to tell him that her life was a tangled, precarious mess, and he'd just revealed he was holding one of the major threads. That his connection to Bob Henderson was a connection to Tanner, and anything connected to Tanner was poison. But she couldn't. It was too much, too complicated, and he was still a stranger. A handsome, helpful, hazel-eyed stranger who was now inextricably linked to her biggest problem. "It's been a long day," she said instead, her voice tight. "I'm just tired. Thank you again for your help." His gaze held hers for a long moment, searching for something she refused to give. He finally gave a slow nod, his expression a mixture of disappointment and puzzlement. "Right, of course." He put his cap back on, forwards this time, the brim shadowing his eyes. "You take care, Max Harper." He turned and walked down the steep gravel drive, his confident stride a stark contrast to the chaotic scramble that had brought him up it. Max watched until his F-150's taillights disappeared around the bend in the county road. Only then did she shut the door, lean her forehead against the cool wood, and let out a long, shaky breath. "Okay, let's recap," her internal MC said, tapping a mental microphone. In the last hour, you have fought a losing battle with an appliance, been verbally assaulted by your ex, been rescued by a ruggedly handsome Ozark Adonis, experienced a flicker of what might be called hope, and then had that hope summarily executed by the words Bob Henderson. Your life isn't a story, it's a soap opera written by a sadist with a thesaurus. Coming up after the break, Max develops a sudden allergy to sawdust and kindness. "Oh, shut up," she whispered to the empty room, but there was no heat in it. She slept in fits and starts, her dreams a chaotic jumble of rolling washing machines, Tanner's sneering face, and Rowan Jacobs' concerned hazel eyes. When her alarm went off at 6, she felt like she'd gone 10 rounds with a heavyweight boxer and lost. The day ahead loomed like a mountain, steeper than her own driveway. She had to face the Henderson projections, which meant diving deep into the numbers of a company she had a profoundly complicated relationship with. And she had to do it knowing that Rowan Jacobs would be walking through the door at some point, meeting with her boss, possibly to do a deal that could change everything. For a wild moment, she considered calling in sick. She could claim a runaway appliance injury. But she couldn't. It would be a victory for Tanner. It would prove his point that she couldn't handle her new life. So she showered, wrestled her unruly hair into a passable ponytail, and put on what she mentally referred to as her business armor, a crisp blouse, dark trousers, and a pair of sensible flats that made her feel grounded. Henderson Construction was housed in a modest, single-story brick building on the edge of Harmony Creek's small downtown square. It smelled of stale coffee, sawdust from the work boots of the foreman, and the faint ozone tang of the ancient copy machine. It was a world away from Tanner's glass and chrome investment firm, and Max had always found a strange comfort in its unpretentious reality. Today, it felt like a cage. "Morning, Maxie," Bob Henderson said as she walked in. He was a barrel-chested man in his late 60s with a kind face, a booming laugh, and a work ethic that had built the company from the ground up. He was also, in Max's experience, completely oblivious to the subtle venom his minority partner, Tanner, regularly spewed. "Morning, Bob," she said, forcing a smile. "Coffee's fresh." "You're a saint. Big morning today," he boomed, clapping her lightly on the shoulder as he passed her desk on his way to the coffee pot. "Meeting with that developer, Jacobs. Sharp fella. Could be a real game-changer for us." Max's stomach did a nervous flip. "Oh, yeah. How so?" Before Bob could answer, the door to the small office in the back opened. Tanner Baldwin stepped out, looking sleek and predatory in a perfectly tailored suit that was wildly out of place in their humble office. He gave Bob a tight smile and then let his eyes slide over to Max, his gaze as cold and dismissive as ever. "Maxine, glad you could make it," he said, as if her attendance was ever in question. "Don't forget I need those Henderson projections on my desk before your lunch break. We wouldn't want our potential new partner thinking we're sloppy, would we?" He was marking his territory, reminding her of her place in front of Bob. It was a classic Tanner move. Max just nodded, her jaw tight, and sat down at her desk, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a verbal response. Her computer screen lit up, displaying the spreadsheet she'd been dreading. Rows and columns of numbers swam before her eyes. She forced herself to focus, losing herself in the familiar, comforting logic of the math. For the next hour, there was no Tanner, no Rowan, no suicidal washing machine. There were only assets and liabilities, profits and losses. She was good at this. It was the one part of her life that felt orderly and controllable. The bell over the office door chimed at 10 o'clock sharp. Max didn't need to look up to know who it was. The air in the room shifted. A subtle scent of fresh air and clean laundry, so different from the day before, yet unmistakably him, cut through the office's musty smell. She kept her eyes glued to the screen, her fingers frozen over the keyboard. "Mr. Jacobs, right on time," Bob's voice boomed. Come on in, come on in." Max could hear the sound of his work boots crossing the linoleum floor. She chanced a quick glance. Rowan was standing by the door, and he looked entirely different. He wore a dark gray button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing tanned, muscular skin. His jeans were replaced by tailored khaki trousers, and his dusty work boots by polished leather shoes. The baseball cap was gone, revealing that his sandy blonde hair was thick and fell across his forehead in a way that was infuriatingly attractive. He looked less like a guy who'd wrestle an appliance on a hill and more like the cover of a successful land developer's monthly magazine. His eyes found hers across the room. The friendly warmth was gone, replaced by a guarded, professional curiosity. He gave her a curt, almost imperceptible nod. "Rowan, good to see you again," Tanner said, gliding out from his office to intercept him. He extended a hand, his smile all teeth. "Tanner Baldwin, we spoke on the phone. I'm the one who really keeps the gears turning around here." The dig at Bob was subtle, but it was there. Rowan shook his hand, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Baldwin, a pleasure." "This is our bookkeeper, Maxine," Tanner said, waving a dismissive hand in her direction. "She's in charge of the little numbers." The condescension was so thick, Max felt like she was suffocating. She felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck. This was her nightmare, the two worlds colliding, with Tanner narrating the whole disaster. She braced herself for Rowan to give her another polite, distant nod, to dismiss her as just part of the office furniture. But he didn't. He took a step toward her desk, his gaze direct and serious. "We've met," Rowan said, his voice calm and steady, but loud enough for both Tanner and Bob to hear clearly. Tanner's smile tightened. "Oh? And what sort of jam was that?" Rowan's eyes flickered to Max for a split second, a silent question in them. He was giving her the power to direct the narrative. She could downplay it, let it go, and allow Tanner's humiliation to stand. Or something inside her, a tiny, defiant spark she thought Tanner had extinguished years ago, flared to life. She looked directly at Tanner, a cool, placid expression on her face. "My new washing machine was making a break for it down my driveway," she said. Rowan was kind enough to help stop it from becoming a creek fixture. Bob let out a hearty laugh. "A runaway washer. Sounds like something that would happen up on that old Miller property. That driveway's a killer." Tanner did not laugh. His eyes narrowed on Max, a flicker of cold fury in their depths. She had not only acknowledged a connection to Rowan, but she had done so with a story that highlighted her new, independent life, the very life he constantly mocked. She had taken his power in the conversation and neutralized it with absurd, small-town honesty. "How rustic," Tanner finally sneered. "Well, shall we?" Bob said, gesturing toward his office, oblivious to the undercurrents swirling in the room. "We've got a lot to discuss." Rowan nodded, but before he turned to follow Bob, his eyes met Max's one last time, and in them she saw a flicker of something new. It wasn't pity or simple curiosity, it was respect, and it felt like a gulp of fresh, clean air after years of breathing stale, recycled poison. He, Bob, and a fuming Tanner disappeared into the office, the door clicking shut behind them. Max was left in the sudden, ringing silence, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Ding, ding, ding," her inner comedian chirped, suddenly back at the main mic with a vengeance. "Ladies and gentlemen, in this corner, weighing in at 115 pounds of repressed rage and bookkeeping skills, we have Maxine the accountant Harper. And in the other corner, the reigning champion of passive aggression, Tanner the terrible Baldwin. The first round goes to the challenger. Who knew the secret weapon was a runaway Kenmore? This changes everything, folks." Max took a deep, shaky breath and turned back to her spreadsheet. The numbers were still there, still orderly, still making sense. But for the first time in a very long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, the rest of her life could be the same way. The question was, what exactly was Rowan Jacobs proposing behind that closed door? Was he a potential ally in her quiet war? Or was he about to become Tanner's newest, most powerful weapon? Chapter 3. The silence that descended after the office door clicked shut was a physical entity. It pressed in on Max, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the hum of her computer and the frantic thumping of her own heart. She stared at the solid oak door as if she could develop X-ray vision through sheer force of will. "And now for the main event," her internal comedian announced, her voice echoing in the vast, empty stadium of Max's anxiety. "Behind door number 1, we have a battle of wits. Will our handsome hero, Rowan the Rescuer Jacobs, see through the slimy charm of Tanner the Terrible? Or will he be swayed by a slick PowerPoint presentation and a firm yet vaguely reptilian handshake? Place your bets, folks. The future of our protagonist's already questionable sanity is on the line." Max squeezed her eyes shut, trying to force the image of Tanner's smug face out of her mind. He'd looked like a shark that had just been tossed a particularly plump seal. And Rowan? Rowan had been a closed book. His professional demeanor had been a perfect, impenetrable wall. The friendly, easygoing man who smelled like sawdust had been replaced by a sharp, focused developer who looked like he could calculate property tax assessments in his head. It was jarring. It was terrifying. She forced her fingers back to the keyboard and tried to focus on the Henderson projections: gross revenue, operating expenses, net profit. The numbers were supposed to be her refuge, a world of black and white certainty in the messy gray chaos of her life. But today, they felt different. They weren't just numbers anymore. They were pieces of a puzzle being discussed in the next room. They were the assets of a company that Rowan Jacobs was interested in, a company that Tanner was a part of, a company that held her financial independence in a vice grip. An hour crawled by like a wounded snail. The muffled sounds from Bob's office were an indistinct murmur, occasionally punctuated by Bob's booming laugh. Each time she heard it, a fresh wave of nausea rolled through her. Was Bob laughing because Rowan had made a good joke, or was he laughing because Tanner had just delivered a witty, dismissive anecdote about his quaint, country-fried ex-girlfriend and her runaway appliances? "Let's go to our on-the-scene reporter, Anxiety," her mind voice chirped. "Anxiety, what's the mood in the room?" "Well, Chuckles," a frantic, high-pitched voice replied, "we're seeing a lot of worst-case scenarios playing out. Tanner is currently convincing Rowan that Max is incompetent, emotionally unstable, and probably keeps squirrels as pets. Rowan is nodding thoughtfully, making a note to have the entire accounting department streamlined as soon as the ink is dry on the contract. Back to you." Max dropped her head into her hands, rubbing her temples. This was unsustainable. She was going to have an aneurysm right here at her desk, and the paramedics would find her slumped over a spreadsheet, the numbers for Q3 depreciation seared onto her retinas. Just as she was contemplating the logistics of faking a sudden, non-life-threatening illness, the office door swung open. Max's head snapped up. Bob came out first, his face flushed with excitement. Tanner followed, a triumphant smirk plastered on his face. Rowan was last, and he looked thoughtful. He'd turned his cardinal's cap around backwards on his head, and his brow was furrowed as he looked down at a folder in his hands. "Maxie, you're a miracle worker," Bob boomed, snatching the printed projections from her desk. He barely glanced at them before handing them to Rowan. "See, I told you, cleanest books in the Ozarks." "I'll have to take your word for it," Rowan said, his voice neutral. He flipped through the pages, his hazel eyes scanning the columns. Max held her breath. She knew her work was impeccable, but having him scrutinize it under Tanner's gleeful gaze felt like a public flogging. "Of course, she has a lot of oversight," Tanner purred, leaning against the edge of her desk, invading her space. The insult was clear, a direct reference to her new life, to the chaos of yesterday. It was designed to frame her as flighty and unreliable, a country bumpkin playing at being a professional. The old Max would have shrunk under the weight of his condescension, staring at her keyboard until he went away. But the old Max hadn't stood her ground against a 200-pound Kenmore. The old Max hadn't been looked at with a flicker of respect by a handsome stranger. She lifted her chin and met Tanner's cold eyes. "The only distraction I've had all morning, Tanner, is the sound of you trying to take credit for Bob's lifetime of hard work." The silence in the office was suddenly absolute. Bob's jovial expression froze. Tanner's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated shock, followed by a surge of cold fury. It was as if a decorative kitten had suddenly lunged for his throat. Rowan Jacobs stopped flipping through the pages. He looked up, his gaze moving from Tanner's enraged face to Max's defiant one. A corner of his mouth twitched, a barely suppressed hint of a smile. It was Bob who broke the spell, letting out a nervous cough. "Well now, tempers are a bit high. Big day, big day." He clapped Rowan on the back. "The point is, we're a well-oiled machine here, solid foundation." "Indeed," Tanner said, his voice a low, dangerous hiss directed at Max. "We'll discuss your contributions later." The threat hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. He was putting her on notice. But for the first time, it didn't fill her with dread. It filled her with a strange, exhilarating fire. "Bob, a pleasure as always," Tanner said, turning his back on Max and giving Rowan a brilliant false smile. "Rowan, I look forward to finalizing the details with you. I'll be in touch." He gave a curt nod and strode out of the office, the bell over the door chiming angrily in his wake. The tension eased, but only slightly. It was now just Max, Bob, and Rowan in the small space. "Whew," Bob breathed, wiping his brow. "That boy's wound tighter than a $2 watch." He looked at Max, a flicker of concern in his eyes. "You all right, Maxie?" "I'm fine, Bob," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Good girl." He beamed at her, the tension of the last few moments already forgotten. His mind was on bigger things. He turned to Rowan, his excitement bubbling over. "Well, what do you think? It's a hell of an opportunity, isn't it?" "It is," Rowan agreed, his eyes still on Max. "A lot to consider." "Consider this," Bob boomed, grinning from ear to ear. "You'd be getting the most respected construction company in 3 counties, a top-notch crew, and the best bookkeeper this side of the Mississippi." He leaned in conspiratorially, his voice a stage whisper that filled the entire room. "Maxie, can you believe it? This fella's not just looking for a partnership. He wants to buy me out. Lock, stock, and barrel. Talking about taking Henderson Construction into the future." The world tilted on its axis. The floor seemed to drop out from under Max's sensible flats. "Hold the phone, ladies and gentlemen. We have a plot twist." The comedian's voice was a frantic shriek in her head. "Our handsome hero isn't joining the team. He's buying the team. This means he would be, oh dear God, he would be Max's boss. The man who saw her covered in gravel and hysteria would be the man signing her paychecks. He could fire Tanner. He could give her a raise. He could replace the ancient copier with one that doesn't smell like burning plastic. This is either the best thing that has ever happened or the absolute most catastrophic worse. No middle ground, folks. Welcome to the emotional Thunderdome. She stared at Rowan, her mouth slightly agape. Buy the company, her company. He wouldn't be a partner Tanner could manipulate. He would have the majority share. He would be the one in control. The power dynamic of her entire life, professional and by extension personal, was about to be rewritten, and this man, this stranger, who held her washing machine and her gaze with equal steadiness, was holding the pen. "Bob," Rowan said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. He shot a pointed look at the older man, a silent plea for discretion. Right. You're the quiet type," Bob chuckled, completely missing the point. "Well, I'm gonna go call the missus. She'll want to hear we can finally take that cruise to Alaska." He clapped Rowan on the back one last time. "You hold down the fort, Maxie." And with that, he bustled into his office, closing the door behind him and leaving Max alone with the man who might be her new boss, her savior, or her executioner. The silence that fell was different from the one before. It was charged, humming with unspoken questions. Rowan took a slow step toward her desk. He put the folder with her projections down gently. "He shouldn't have put it like that," Rowan said, his voice soft. "I'm sorry if that was a shock." Max found her voice. "A shock? No. It's perfectly normal to find out your entire professional future is being decided by a man you met yesterday while he was preventing your Kenmore from becoming a hood ornament." A bubble of hysterical laughter escaped her. "It's just a typical Wednesday in Harmony Creek." His lips curved into that genuine, heart-stopping smile she remembered from the driveway. "Is it ever boring around here?" "Never," she breathed. "But it's not usually this consequential." She looked at him, the humor draining away, replaced by a raw vulnerability she couldn't hide. What does this mean? For the company? For me? He leaned against the desk, mirroring Tanner's earlier posture. But where Tanner had been an invasion, Rowan was an invitation. He wasn't crowding her, he was creating a shared space. He took off his cap, ran a hand through his sandy hair, and then put it back on, forwards this time. "It means I see a lot of potential here," he said, his hazel eyes serious. "Bob's built a great company with a solid reputation, but it could be more. It could grow, take on bigger projects, expand its reach." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "And from what I've seen, the person who keeps the whole thing from flying apart is you. Those books are a work of art." Praise. Genuine, professional praise. It was so foreign, so unexpected, that she didn't know how to react. Tanner's compliments were always backhanded, designed to be taken away at a moment's notice. Rowan's felt solid, real. "And Tanner," she whispered, the name tasting like poison. Rowan's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "I'm a pretty good judge of character, Max, and I know a parasite when I see one." Relief washed over her so powerfully she felt dizzy. He saw it. He saw Tanner for exactly what he was. "The deal isn't done yet," he continued, his tone turning serious again. "There are a lot of moving parts, but I wanted you to hear it from me. What I'm proposing is an investment in this company's future, and you're a big part of that." It was too much. A week ago, her biggest life goal was to survive another condescending Tuesday phone call. Now, this man was talking about her future, about her value, while the scent of fresh air still clung to him. "Warning, warning," the comedian yelled from the control booth in her brain. "Hope levels reaching critical. Shields are down. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Proceed with extreme caution and a healthy dose of crippling self-doubt." "I don't know what to say," she finally managed. "You don't have to say anything right now," he said kindly. He pushed himself off the desk. "But I get the feeling things are a little complicated here, and I'd like to understand them better, from your perspective." He hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Would you be willing to have dinner with me tonight? We could go somewhere quiet, talk about the company, off the record." An invitation, a date that wasn't a date, a business meeting that felt intensely personal. Her mind reeled with the implications. Tanner would find out. He would be incandescent with rage. It was dangerous. It was reckless. It was the most hopeful, thrilling thing that had happened to her in 5 years. She started, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Behind them, the bell on the front door jingled. They both turned. A delivery man stood there with a large bouquet of flowers. Not just any flowers, a ridiculously ostentatious arrangement of 24 long-stemmed red roses, the kind Tanner used to send to her office as a public display of ownership. "Delivery for Maxine Harper," the man said. Rowan's eyes flickered from the roses to Max's face, which had gone pale. The card, she knew, would have a cloying, possessive message on it. It was Tanner's move. He was reasserting control, reminding her, and everyone else, who she belonged to. Rowan's friendly expression tightened, his jaw setting as he took in the scene. He looked at Max, his hazel eyes searching hers, waiting for her answer. The unspoken question hung in the air between them, heavier than ever. Who was she going to be? The woman who accepted the roses, or the woman who went to dinner? Chapter 4. The 24 red roses stood on the threshold like a velvet-draped firing squad. They were aggressively beautiful, a declaration of war disguised as an apology. Max's stomach twisted into a pretzel. For 5 years, roses like these had been Tanner's chess move. They were never about love. They were about position. They were a public relations campaign designed to broadcast the narrative that he was a devoted, if occasionally difficult, partner, and she was the lucky recipient of his largesse. They were a beautiful, fragrant lie. Rowan's gaze was fixed on her, his hazel eyes unreadable but intense. He wasn't just waiting for her answer about dinner anymore. He was waiting to see which army she was going to enlist with, the one that sent flowers or the one that helped push washing machines. And here we go, folks. It's the final round of Who Wants to Ruin Max's Life, her internal comedian shrieked from a panic room in the back of her brain. Will she choose door number 1, a lifetime supply of thorny, passive-aggressive floral arrangements and soul-crushing condescension, or door number 2, a dinner date with a handsome stranger that could either lead to true love or get her fired on Friday? This is a tough one, folks. Both options come with a complementary side of debilitating anxiety. The delivery man, a teenager with a wispy mustache, cleared his throat. "Ma'am, do you want 'em?" Max took a breath. It felt like the first clean, untainted breath she'd taken all day. She looked from the roses, Tanner's roses, reeking of control, to Rowan, who smelled like sawdust and integrity. The choice was terrifying. The choice was obvious. She gave the delivery kid a small, apologetic smile. "No, thank you. I'm not accepting them. You can return them to the sender." The kid's eyes widened. "You're refusing them?" he asked, as if the concept were completely alien. In Harmony Creek, you didn't refuse a 2-dozen-rose bouquet. It was like refusing a slice of pie at the church potluck. It just wasn't done. "I am," Max said, her voice gaining strength. "He can have them back. Maybe they'll cheer him up." The corner of Rowan's mouth twitched again, the hint of a smile finally breaking through his neutral expression. It was all the encouragement she needed. The delivery kid shrugged, defeated by the sheer weirdness of the situation. "Okay, lady, your funeral." He turned and shuffled out, the rosens bobbing sadly in his arms as the bell on the door announced his departure. Max turned back to Rowan, her heart doing a frantic tap dance against her ribs. The silence in the office was cavernous. She felt like she had just disarmed a bomb with a hairpin and a prayer. "So," she said, her voice a little breathless, "dinner, yes, I'd like that." The smile that broke across Rowan's face was like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. It was full and genuine, crinkling the corners of his eyes and making him look for a moment exactly like the man who had rescued her Kenmore. "Great," he said, his voice warm and low. "Is 7 o'clock okay? There's a place just outside of town called the Miller's Perch. It's quiet." 7 is perfect." "I'll meet you there." He picked up the folder containing her projections, his fingers brushing hers for a fraction of a second. A jolt, just like the one on her driveway, shot up her arm. "And, Max?" "Yes?" "That was impressive," he said, his voice soft for her ears only. He gave her a final nod, a look that communicated a world of understanding, and then he was gone. The bell chimed his exit, leaving Max alone in the echoing silence, the phantom scent of roses, and the very real scent of sawdust warring in the air. "Well, that's a wrap on our morning show," her internal MC announced, sounding dazed but triumphant. Our girl just refused the roses of war and accepted the dinner date of destiny. Up next, we have an afternoon filled with frantic work-related panic, followed by our evening primetime special, What Do I Wear to Impress a Man Who Might Be My Boss and or Soulmate? It's gonna be a ratings blockbuster, folks. The rest of the afternoon was a blur. Tanner, true to form, did not call. A call would have been too direct. Instead, he sent a single, chilling text message at precisely 3:17 p.m. "We need to have a talk about your unprofessional behavior. My office, tomorrow, 8 a.m. sharp." She stared at the message until the words swam. He wasn't yelling, he was scheduling. It was a corporate power play, a summons. He was going to dress her down, threaten her job, and remind her of her place. The fear was a cold, familiar knot in her stomach. But this time, something else was there too, a tiny, flickering ember of defiance. She didn't reply. She simply deleted the message, an act that felt as momentous as refusing the roses. At 5 o'clock, she packed her bag and practically ran out of the office, not wanting to give Bob a chance to ask any well-meaning but difficult questions. The drive home up her treacherous, gravel-strewn driveway felt different. It was still a challenge, but today she felt like she'd conquered a much steeper climb already. Her mobile home, clinging to the hillside, looked less like a nervous barnacle and more like a cozy fortress. It was her safe house. She walked in and was greeted by the sight of her brand-new Kenmore sitting peacefully in the laundry nook, a silent, gleaming monument to the chaos that had brought Rowan Jacobs into her life. She stood in front of her closet, a vast wasteland of practical jeans, sensible blouses, and a few sad, outdated dresses Tanner had picked out for her years ago. They were sheath dresses, mostly in cold, unforgiving colors, designed to make her look sleek and unobtrusive at his corporate events. She pulled one out, a navy blue number, and held it up. It felt like a costume from a life that was no longer hers. Tonight on Project Runaway, our contestant has to create a look that says, "I am a competent professional who was also casually alluring, but not so alluring that you think I'm trying too hard, and also I'm not emotionally scarred by my recent breakup. I am in fact thriving. Please believe me." The comedian's voice was laced with panic. Her materials? 3 pairs of jeans, a flannel shirt, and a dress that has the personality of a tax form. This is going to be a disaster. Max tossed the navy dress onto the bed in disgust. Rummaging in the back of the closet, her fingers brushed against something soft. She pulled it out. It was a dress she'd bought on a whim a year ago at a small boutique, a rare act of rebellion. She'd never worn it. Tanner had taken one look at it and pronounced it too floral. It was a simple, wrap-style dress, the color of a summer sky, with a delicate print of white and yellow wildflowers. It was short, fluttery sleeves, and a hem that would hit just at her knees. It was soft, it was comfortable, and it was utterly, completely her. She put it on. It fit perfectly, accentuating her curves in a way that felt womanly and confident, not constricted. She looked in the mirror and saw not Tanner Baldwin's quiet accessory, but Max Harper, the woman who owned a lopsided box on a hill, the woman who told her ex-boyfriend, via a confused delivery boy, to go stick his roses in a vase and think about what he'd done. She paired it with a pair of simple wedge sandals, let her unruly brown hair do its thing, and put on a touch of mascara. She looked nice. She looked like herself. The Miller's Perch was an old stone building that had, a century ago, been an actual grist mill. Now it was a restaurant known for having the best fried catfish in 3 counties and a quiet, candlelit ambiance. It was the kind of place you went for an anniversary, not a hostile corporate takeover. Rowan was already there, sitting out a secluded booth in the corner. He stood up when he saw her. He had changed out of his work clothes into a simple, dark green Henley and a clean pair of jeans. His baseball cap was gone, and his sandy hair fell casually across his forehead. He looked relaxed, handsome, and about a million miles away from the sharp-suited developer who had been in her office that morning. "Wow," he said, his voice soft as she approached the table. His eyes did a slow, appreciative sweep from her sandals to her face, and he smiled. "You look amazing, Max." A blush crept up her neck, warm and unfamiliar. "Thanks. You clean up pretty well yourself, Mr. Jacobs." "Please," he chuckled, gesturing for her to sit. "It's Rowan." The first few minutes were filled with the comfortable, slightly awkward dance of a first date that wasn't a date. They ordered drinks, iced tea for her, a local craft beer for him, and made small talk about the weather, the surprisingly good breadsticks, and the history of the mill. But beneath the surface, the real reason they were there hummed like a high-voltage wire. Finally, after the waitress had taken their dinner order, Rowan leaned forward, his expression turning serious. He'd unconsciously started to fiddle with the sugar dispenser, a thoughtful, focused gesture. "Max," he began, "I want to be upfront with you. When I started looking at Henderson Construction, it was just a business deal. Good reputation, solid crews, room for growth, a sound investment." He paused, meeting her eyes across the candlelit table. Tanner Baldwin was just a name on a piece of paper, a 10% minority partner. Usually, that's just a nuisance you have to buy out or manage. But after today, I get the feeling he's more than a nuisance. Max took a slow sip of her iced tea, the cold glass a comfortable anchor. "You could say that." "Talk to me," he said, his voice gentle but firm. Off the record, I need to know what I'd be walking into. I saw the way he talked to you, the way he looked at you after you stood up to him. That wasn't just business. And so she told him. Not everything, not the years of 1,000 tiny cuts that had eroded her self-esteem to dust, but she told him enough. She told him about their 5-year relationship, about his need for control, about the sterile glass condo that never felt like home. She explained how he'd helped her get the job at Henderson's when she'd needed one, a gesture that had seemed kind at the time, but which she now understood was just another chain to bind her to him. She told him how, since she'd left, he used his position in the company to keep her off balance, to remind her that she couldn't truly escape. He likes to make sure I know my paycheck has his fingerprints on it, she finished, surprised at how steady her voice was. He needs to believe I can't make it without him. Moving to Harmony Creek, buying my own place, it's a direct challenge to that belief, and he doesn't handle challenges well. Rowan listened without interrupting, his hazel eyes never leaving her face. He absorbed every word, his expression shifting from thoughtful concern to a slow, simmering anger. The fuse she hadn't known he had was visibly shortening. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. "Parasite was too kind a word," he said finally, his voice a low growl. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. How Bob Henderson hasn't seen it, I'll never know. "Bob sees what he wants to see," Max said with a shrug. "He sees a slick young partner who brings in investment money and talks a good game. He doesn't see the rot underneath." "Well, I see it," Rowan said, his gaze locking with hers, "and I don't do business with rot." The waitress arrived with their food, breaking the intensity of the moment. As they began to eat, the conversation shifted. Rowan told her about his own life. He'd grown up in a small town not unlike Harmony Creek, started his career working summers for a local construction crew, and slowly built his own development company from the ground up. He talked about his projects not in terms of profit margins, but in terms of building communities. He was passionate, smart, and funny. He asked her about her 5 acres of woods, about what she planned to do with them, and he actually listened to her half-baked ideas about a wildflower garden and a ridiculously oversized porch swing. She found herself laughing, a real, genuine laugh that came from her belly, not from a place of hysteria or desperation. She felt light. The weight of Tanner, of the Henderson projections, of the precarious state of her own life seemed to have lifted for a few hours. As they were finishing their meal, he tilted his head, a curious smile playing on his lips. "Can I ask you something you don't have to answer?" "Shoot."
"That voice in your head," he said, "the one you were talking to on your driveway yesterday, what's its deal?" Max froze, a forkful of chocolate cake halfway to her mouth. She felt a hot blush flood her cheeks. "Oh, God, you heard that?" "Just bits and pieces," he said, his smile kind. "Something about a pep talk, and then you told it to shut up. And today, when you refused the roses, I saw it in your eyes. You were having a whole conversation with yourself before you said a word." She put her fork down, feeling utterly exposed. "It's my internal stand-up comedian," she mumbled, staring at her plate. "It's a long story. It's my coping mechanism. It's stupid." "It's not stupid," he said gently. "It sounds like it's what helped you survive." He reached across the table, and for the second time that day, his fingers brushed against hers. This time, he didn't pull away. His touch was warm and firm, a steadying presence. "I'd like to hear one of its routines sometime." She looked up at him then, into his warm, sincere eyes, and her heart did something more than a stutter step. It did a full-on, soaring, terrifying swan dive. He paid the bill over her protests and walked her out into the cool night air. The parking lot was gravel, and the sound of their footsteps crunching under the starry Ozark sky was the only sound. When they reached her little Hyundai, they stopped, a comfortable but charged silence falling between them. "Thank you for tonight, Rowan," she said softly, "for dinner and for listening." "Thank you for trusting me," he replied, his voice a low rumble. He stood close, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. close enough that she could smell the faint, clean scent of his soap mixed with the night air. About tomorrow, with Tanner, don't let him get in your head. Just do your job. Be the professional you are. I'll handle the rest. You will? I've dealt with bullies like him before, he said. They're all the same, all bluff and bluster. You just have to know where to push. He looked down at her, his expression softening. I'm really glad that washer tried to make a break for it. Me too, she whispered. He lifted his hand, and for a heart-stopping second, she thought he was going to cup her cheek, to lean in and kiss her, but instead he just gently tucked a stray strand of her unruly hair behind her ear. His fingers grazed her skin, and the simple, innocent touch felt more intimate than any kiss she'd ever received from Tanner. You get home safe, Max Harper, he said, his voice husky. He took a step back, giving her space. She got into her car, her hands trembling slightly as she put the key in the ignition. He waited until she had pulled out of the parking lot, his tall frame silhouetted in her rearview mirror, before he turned to his own truck. The entire drive home, her mind was a silent, buzzing blank. The comedian had left the building. There were no jokes, no witty observations. There was only the lingering warmth of his touch on her skin and the echo of his voice in her ears. It wasn't until she was standing in her own living room, the moonlight streaming through the window and illuminating the valley below, that the voice returned. It wasn't loud or frantic. It was a quiet, awestruck whisper from the back of the house. Well, hot damn, the comedian said, her voice filled with a stunned, uncharacteristic sincerity. Folks, I think the ground just shook.
Chapter 5. Sleep, when it finally came, was deep and dreamless. For the first time in what felt like a decade, Max didn't wake up with the ghost of Tanner's criticisms echoing in her ears. She woke up instead to the Ozark dawn painting the valley in shades of rose and gold, the memory of Rowan Jacobs' warm smile a tangible presence in the quiet of her bedroom. She felt rested. It was a foreign, almost alarming sensation. "Good morning, Harmony Creek." The voice of her internal comedian was uncharacteristically chipper, sounding like a morning zoo DJ who'd had way too much coffee. "The birds are chirping, the sun is shining, and our girl Max has just had her first 8-hour REM cycle since the Bush administration. All thanks to a 6'2" land developer who smells like a lumberjack's dream. But don't get too comfortable, folks, because coming up at 8 a.m. sharp, it's Confrontation Station, starring our favorite antagonist, Tanner Baldwin. Will our heroine be able to maintain her newfound zen, or will she crumble like a day-old donut? Stay tuned. The thought of the 8 a.m. meeting was a splash of icy water, but it didn't extinguish the small, warm flame of hope kindled the night before. Rowan's parting words, "I'll handle the rest," echoed in her mind. It was a promise she desperately wanted to believe, but years of conditioning had taught her that when it came to Tanner, she was always on her own. She stood in front of her closet, the floral dress from last night hanging on the back of the door like a battle standard. It felt too hopeful, too vulnerable for the day ahead. Today required armor. She pulled on the same crisp blouse and dark trousers as yesterday, but as she looked in the mirror, she saw something different. The clothes were the same, but the woman wearing them had changed. Her shoulders seemed a little broader, her chin a little higher. She pulled her unruly hair back into a sleek ponytail, a no-nonsense style that felt like a declaration of intent. She was no longer just surviving, she was preparing for battle. The drive to Henderson Construction was a study in contrasts. The morning was beautiful, the air crisp and clean, but as she pulled into the familiar gravel lot, a sense of dread settled in her stomach. The office building, which had sometimes felt like a refuge from Tanner's world, now felt like the arena. Bob was already there, a thermos of coffee in one hand and a glossy travel brochure in the other. "Morning, Maxie. Take a look at this. The Glacier Bay Grandeur Package. Comes with a complimentary whale watching tour. Can you believe it?" He was so lost in his Alaskan dreams that he was completely oblivious to the storm clouds gathering on his own horizon. "Looks amazing, Bob," she said, forcing a smile that felt brittle. She sat at her desk, the familiar hum of her computer a weak shield against her mounting anxiety.
She tried to work, to lose herself in the comforting certainty of numbers, but her eyes kept straying to the clock on the wall. 7:48, 7:53. Each tick of the second hand was a tiny drumbeat counting down to her execution. "All right, let's go over the game plan," her inner coach yelled from the sidelines of her mind. "He's gonna come at you with condescension and professional jargon. You counter with polite, monosyllabic answers. He'll try to bait you, mention your tin can on the hill. You pivot to the quarterly tax filings. He brings up dinner with Rowan. You bring up the depreciation schedule for the new fleet of trucks. Do not engage. Do not get emotional. Be a gray rock, a boring, sensible, financially astute gray rock." At 7:58, the bell over the door jingled. Tanner walked in. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than her Hyundai, his hair perfectly coiffed, a leather briefcase in his hand. He radiated a cold, predatory calm. He didn't even look at her. He gave Bob a curt nod, walked past her desk without a word, and disappeared into his office, closing the door with a soft, definitive click. The silence he left in his wait was more menacing than any threat. He was making her wait. He was reminding her who was in charge, who set the schedule, who held all the cards. The clock ticked to 8:00, then 8:01, 8:02. At 8:04, the intercom on her phone buzzed, making her jump. "Maxine." His voice was a cold, flat line. "My office. Now." She stood, her legs feeling like overcooked noodles. She smoothed down her blouse, took a deep breath, and walked the 10 longest steps of her life to his door. She knocked once before entering. His office was the antithesis of the rest of the building. Where Henderson construction was warm wood and worn linoleum, Tanner's space was chrome, glass, and black leather. It was a sterile, airless box, a miniature version of the condo she had escaped. He was seated behind a massive glass desk, steepling his fingers, looking at her like a biologist studying a particularly uninteresting specimen. "Close the door," he said. She did, the click of the latch sounding like a cell door locking. "Maxine," he began, his voice dangerously soft, "I was disappointed in your behavior yesterday. Your little outburst in front of Mr. Jacobs was not only unprofessional, it was deeply embarrassing. For me." "And there it is, folks, the opening salvo," the comedian whispered from the cheap seats. "He's not mad you stood up for yourself. He's mad you did it in front of the cool new kid. It's all about appearances." "I stated a fact, Tanner," she said, her voice quiet but steady. She was a gray rock. He waved a dismissive hand. "Your facts are irrelevant. What is relevant is maintaining a professional decorum, something you seem to have forgotten since you decided to go live in the wilderness. Which brings me to my next point." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Dinner with Rowan Jacobs. What exactly did you think you were accomplishing with that little stunt?" "It was a business dinner," she said, the lie tasting only slightly of ash. Tanner let out a short, ugly laugh. "A business dinner? Please, don't insult my intelligence." It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to get close to the new money. "Do you really think a man like Rowan Jacobs, a successful, sophisticated developer, would have any real interest in a small-town bookkeeper living in a trailer? He was being polite, Maxine, or maybe he just has a morbid curiosity about how the other half lives." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking at the heart of her deepest insecurities. For a moment, the gray rock crumbled. The shame was a hot flush on her cheeks. Had Rowan been laughing at her? Was this all just a game to him? But then she remembered the look in his eyes across the candlelit table. The way he'd said, "I see the rot." The way his fingers had felt when he tucked her hair behind her ear. That wasn't politeness. That wasn't morbid curiosity. "You don't know anything about it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Oh, I know everything I need to," he sneered, sensing victory. I know that you are an employee of this company, a company in which I am a partner, and your cavorting with a potential buyer is a massive conflict of interest. Your judgment is compromised. Your focus is clearly not on your work. Frankly, I'm questioning your competence to continue in this role." This was it, the final move. He was threatening her job, her livelihood, the one piece of her life she had left that was stable. The fear was a cold, hard knot in her chest. The walls of the glass box were closing in. And then the door opened. They both looked up, startled. Rowan Jacobs stood in the doorway, his solid frame filling the space. He hadn't knocked. He wore a simple plaid work shirt and jeans, his dusty boots a stark, earthy contrast to Tanner's polished Italian loafers. He was holding a steaming mug of coffee, and on his head, his St. Louis Cardinals cap was turned backwards. "Holy smokes, folks, it's a run-in." The comedian was on her feet, screaming into the mic. "The cavalry has arrived, and he's wearing flannel. This is not in the script. I repeat, this is not in the script." Rowan didn't look at Max. His calm hazel eyes were fixed on Tanner. "Morning, Baldwin," he said, his tone casual, as if he just walked in on a discussion about the weather. "Hope I'm not interrupting." Tanner was so shocked he was momentarily speechless. He visibly straightened his tie, trying to regain his composure. "Jacobs, this is a private employee meeting." "Is it?" Rowan took a sip of his coffee, his gaze never wavering. "Baldwin, that sounded a lot like you were discussing my dinner plans."
And since my dinner plans seem to have become an official matter of Henderson construction business, I thought I should probably weigh in. He took a step into the room, letting the door swing shut behind him. He leaned against the wall, crossing his arms over his chest, a picture of relaxed, unshakable confidence. The power dynamic in the room shifted so fast it was like the floor had tilted. "My dinner with Maxine was immensely productive," Rowan said, his voice dropping a notch, the easygoing friendliness replaced by a hard, steel edge. "She gave me a much clearer picture of this company's day-to-day operations. Her insight into the financial health and administrative structure was invaluable. In fact, it was significantly more useful than the vague, self-aggrandizing overview you gave me yesterday." Tanner's face went from pale to a mottled, furious red. "Now see here." "No, you see here," Roman cut him off, his voice still quiet, but now carrying a dangerous weight. The long fuse had just burned down to the powder. "Max Harper is the most competent person in this building. Her books are immaculate, her projections are flawless, and from what I can see, she is the glue that holds this entire operation together. You seem to see her as your personal punching bag. I see her as this company's single greatest asset." He pushed off the wall and took a step toward the desk. Tanner actually flinched, leaning back in his $1,000 chair. "So let me be perfectly clear," Rowan continued, his voice a low growl. "You will no longer be holding private meetings with her. You will no longer question her competence. You will treat her with the professional respect she has earned. And if I get even a whiff of you trying to bully or intimidate her again, our deal to buy out this company will be off the table. But my deal to buy out your 10% share will suddenly become very, very aggressive. Do you understand me?" The silence in the room was absolute. Tanner sat there, his mouth slightly open, completely and utterly defeated. The bully, stripped of his power, was just a small, pathetic man in an expensive suit. Rowan then turned to Max. The hardness in his eyes softened instantly, replaced by a warm, reassuring calm. "Max," he said, his voice back to its normal, gentle tone, "Bob and I are ready to go over those Mill Creek project files whenever you have a moment to pull them for us." It was a dismissal, an order, a life raft. Max nodded, unable to find her voice. She stood up, walked past Tanner's desk. Tanner refused to meet her eyes, staring instead at a fixed point on his glass desktop, and opened the door.
She walked out into the main office, back into the world of worn linoleum and the smell of stale coffee, leaving the two men alone in the glass and chrome cage. She made it to her desk, her legs trembling so hard she had to grip the edge to keep from collapsing. She was breathing in short, ragged gasps, her heart hammering against her ribs, not with fear, but with a wild, triumphant adrenaline. And that's the ball game, ladies and gentlemen. The comedian's voice was hoarse with victory. Baldwin has been knocked out. I repeat, knocked clean out. The ref is waving it off. The crowd is on its feet. The accountant from the hill country has a new champion, and he just body-slammed the villain with a verbal piledriver. I haven't seen a beatdown like that since the Piggly Wiggly incident of 22. A moment later, Rowan emerged from Tanner's office. He walked over to her desk, placing his now empty coffee mug down beside her keyboard. He leaned in, his voice a low, private murmur. "You okay?" She looked up at him, at his kind, concerned hazel eyes, and a wobbly, grateful smile spread across her face. "Better than okay," she breathed. "Rowan, thank you." "I told you I'd handle it," he said, with a small, private smile of his own. It was a look that said, "We're a team." He straightened up, his professional demeanor snapping back into place as Bob emerged from his own office. "Ready for those files when you are, Max." He gave her a final, almost imperceptible wink, and then turned to join Bob. Max watched him walk away, his tall, confident stride a comforting, solid presence in the chaos of her world. The ground hadn't just shaken. An earthquake had just ripped through her life, leveling the prison Tanner had built around her. And as she turned to her filing cabinet, her hands steady for the first time all morning, she realized she wasn't afraid of the aftershocks. She was ready to start building something new on the fault line. Chapter 6. The Mill Creek project files felt blessedly solid in Max's hands. They were tangible, real, a stack of papers detailing survey lines, material costs, and permit applications. They were a world away from the surreal, high-stakes drama that had just unfolded in Tanner's glass and chrome terrarium. Max laid the files on Bob's big oak desk, where Rowan was already spreading out a set of blueprints. She retreated to her own desk, trying to look busy, trying to look like her entire world hadn't just been upended and then set right by a man in a Cardinals cap. "And now, for your regularly scheduled programming," her internal comedian announced, her voice now a calm, smooth PBS-style narrator. Having successfully witnessed the public neutering of a corporate predator, our protagonist will now attempt to return to her natural habitat, the spreadsheet. Watch as she heroically pretends to care about the fluctuating price of no-2 pine lumber while her adrenal glands are screaming for a margarita and a long nap. It is a riveting display of professional fortitude. She managed to focus for a solid 10 minutes before the door to Tanner's office opened. Max didn't look up, but she felt the shift in the atmosphere. The air grew 10 degrees colder. She heard the soft, expensive whisper of his suit trousers as he walked past her desk. She risked a glance from the corner of her eye. He was moving quickly, his gaze fixed on the front door, his face a tight mask of controlled fury. He looked like a thwarted Bond villain being forced to flee his exploding volcano lair, only his getaway vehicle was a BMW sedan, and his lair smelled faintly of burnt coffee. He didn't say a word to Bob or Rowan. He didn't even acknowledge their existence. The bell over the door jingled his departure, a tinny, pathetic sound compared to the thunder of his silent rage. Bob Henderson looked up from the blueprints, a deep frown on his face. What in tarnation has gotten into him? He looked like my wife's cat after I accidentally ran over its favorite squeaky mouse. Rowan, who was leaning over the desk with his back to Max, didn't turn around. "Maybe he just remembered he has a pressing engagement," he said, his voice a low, even rumble that Max could feel in her teeth. It was a masterpiece of understatement. "Pressing engagement my foot," her comedian snorted. "He's off to find a puppy to kick, or, more likely, to call his lawyer and see if terminal humiliation is grounds for a lawsuit. Good luck with that, pal. I've got the world's most charming star witness." Bob, bless his oblivious heart, just shrugged and turned his attention back to the blueprints. Well, his loss. This Mill Creek expansion is a gold mine, Rowan, a gold mine. For the next hour, Max worked in a state of hyper-aware bliss. The low murmur of Bob and Rowan's voices from the other side of the room was a comforting soundtrack. They were talking business, real business, about building and growth and the future. There was no undercurrent of malice, no passive-aggressive digs. It was just work, honest work, and she was a part of it, a vital part, according to the man who was about to own the place. The thought was so staggering that she had to stop and reboot her brain twice. Finally, she heard the sound of blueprints being rolled up and chairs scraping against the floor. "It's a solid plan, Bob," Rowan was saying. "A few things to iron out, but the potential is definitely there." "I told you. You've got a good head on your shoulders, son. Maxie, walk Mr. Jacobs out, will you? I've got a date with a brochure for a 7-day fjord adventure." He winked and disappeared into his office, humming something that sounded vaguely like a sea shanty. Max stood as Rowan approached her desk. The office suddenly felt very small again. He picked up his empty coffee mug and held it, his thumb tracing the rim. "Thank you," he said, his professional voice firmly in place. "It's my job," she replied, her own voice sounding ridiculously formal. He gave her a small smile, the one that made the corners of his hazel eyes crinkle.
"You know, all this talk of expansion and development has me thinking." He paused, his gaze dropping to the mug in his hands, then meeting hers again. "There's a local diner just outside town, the Hungry Heifer. Rumor has it they have the best cheeseburger in the state. I was thinking of expanding my research on local assets. Tonight? Around 7? The question hung in the air between them. It wasn't a business dinner. It wasn't a rescue mission. It was a date. A real, no bones about it, cheeseburger and french fries date. "Oh, here we go," her mind voice sang, now in the style of a game show host. Will she accept this incredible invitation? A date with our returning champion, Rowan the Rescuer Jacobs. The prize package includes a delicious meal, sparkling conversation, and a chance to see if he's as good at charming a lady as he is at verbally dismantling her tyrannical ex-boyfriend. Max Harper, come on down. "I think," she said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across her face, "that sounds like a very sound investment." His grin widened, lighting up his whole face. "I'll pick you up. I think I can handle the driveway a little better when there isn't a runaway appliance involved." The rest of the day passed in a glorious, productive haze. For the first time, Max didn't leave the office at 5:01 p.m. on the dot. She stayed late, organizing the very files she and Rowan had been discussing, adding notes, cross-referencing supplier costs. She wasn't just doing her job, she was taking ownership of it. The work felt different. It felt like hers. When she finally locked up and drove home, the sun was setting, casting long, peaceful shadows across the valley. Her perpendicular driveway didn't seem so much like a launch ramp as a welcome mat to her own private kingdom. Her mobile home, which had once felt like a symbol of her reduced circumstances, now felt like a castle. It was small, yes, and a little lopsided, but it was a fortress of solitude and peace. She walked in, dropped her keys in the bowl by the door, a bowl she had chosen, not one that came with a furnished condo, and looked at her domain. There were still boxes to be unpacked, walls to be painted, a life to be built, and for the first time, the task felt exciting, not overwhelming. She showered and stood before her closet again. The floral dress from last night seemed to wink at her. It was lovely, but it was for a quiet, candlelit dinner where secrets were shared. Tonight was for a cheeseburger at the Hungry Heifer. Tonight was for laughter and getting to know the man, not the developer. She pulled on a pair of dark wash jeans that fit her curves perfectly, a soft, scoop-necked t-shirt the color of ripe raspberries, and the same wedge sandals. It was simple, it was comfortable, it was her. "Tonight's look is effortlessly chic," her internal stylist announced with a dramatic flourish.
It says, "Yes, I am a high-powered bookkeeper who can calculate amortization schedules in her sleep, but I am also a fun-loving gal who enjoys a good burger and is not afraid of a potential ketchup stain. It's a bold choice, folks, but I think she can pull it off." At precisely 7 o'clock, the crunch of gravel announced his arrival. She looked out the window and saw his dark blue F-150 idling at the bottom of the drive. A moment later, he was walking up the slope, his stride easy and confident. He was wearing a fresh pair of jeans and a gray Henley that stretched across his broad shoulders. No cap this time. His sandy blonde hair caught the last rays of the evening sun. He looked good, dangerously good. She opened the door before he could knock. "You made it," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "I was about to send out a search party." He stopped on her little porch, his eyes doing a slow, appreciative scan that made her skin tingle. "The view from down there is almost as good as the view from up here," he said, his voice a low, warm hum. "You ready to go?" The Hungry Heifer was everything a small-town diner should be. Red vinyl booths, a long Formica countertop with spinning stools, and the delicious, artery-hardening smell of fried onions and sizzling beef. It was noisy and cheerful, filled with local families and farmers in seed caps arguing about the weather. Rowan seemed to know half the people in the place, exchanging friendly greetings and handshakes as they were led to a booth by the window. "You're kind of a big deal around here, aren't you?" Max teased as they slid into the booth. He chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. "Nah, I just do a lot of business in these small towns. You get to know people. It's the best part of the job." The date was effortless. They talked about everything and nothing. He told her funny stories about his first construction job, which mostly involved digging ditches in the wrong places. She told him about growing up in a town even smaller than Harmony Creek, where the biggest event of the year was the annual turtle race. He asked about her family, and she found herself talking about them for the first time in years without Tanner's bored, dismissive presence, making her feel like her life story was a tedious chore. He was an incredible listener. He didn't just wait for his turn to talk. He heard her, asking thoughtful questions, his hazel eyes focused on her with an intensity that made her feel like she was the only person in the loud, crowded diner. The cheeseburgers arrived, glorious, half-pound monuments to American cuisine, served with a mountain of crispy fries. "Okay, this is it," he said with mock seriousness. "The moment of truth. The reputation of an entire county rests on this burger." He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and then his eyes widened in genuine delight. "Oh, that's the stuff," he mumbled through a full mouth. Max laughed, a real, unforced peal of joy, and took a bite of her own. He was right. It was, without a doubt, the best cheeseburger she had ever tasted. They ate in comfortable silence for a minute, a shared moment of simple, greasy bliss. "So," Rowan said, after swallowing a formidable mouthful, "you're a stand-up comedian. Is she getting any new material out of this?" Max felt a familiar blush creep up her neck, but this time it wasn't from embarrassment. It was warm. "She's mostly just in shock," Max admitted. "She's used to a steady diet of tragedy and existential despair. All this competence and genuine niceness is throwing her for a loop. She doesn't know what to do with a hero. The villains are so much easier to write jokes for." "I'm no hero, Max," he said, his smile fading slightly, his expression turning serious. "I'm just a guy who hates bullies." "Well," she said, her voice soft, "to the person being bullied, that looks a lot like a hero." His gaze held hers across the table, and the noisy diner seemed to fade into a distant hum. The air between them crackled with an energy that had nothing to do with the fluorescent lights overhead. It was warm and electric and real. The ground, she realized with a jolt, was shaking again. He drove her home under a sky littered with a million stars, the kind you could never see from the Lake of the Ozarks. They didn't talk much on the ride back, but it wasn't an awkward silence. It was a comfortable, settled quiet, the kind shared by people who are beginning to understand each other without words. He parked at the bottom of the drive and killed the engine. He turned in his seat to face her, his arm resting on the back of the bench seat, his fingers just inches from her shoulder. "I had a really good time tonight, Max," he said, his voice a low murmur in the dark cab of the truck. "Me too," she whispered. "Thank you for the research." He chuckled softly. The research was a definite success. He paused, and his expression grew more serious, more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "When I was on your porch earlier, and you told me I seemed like a hero, that's not who I am, but it's who I'd like to be, for you." Her breath caught in her throat. The cab of the truck felt impossibly small, charged with a lifetime of unspoken things. He was leaning in, slowly, his eyes searching her for permission. She gave it to him, with a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. He closed the small distance between them. His lips were soft, hesitant at first, a gentle question. And then, as she leaned into him, her hand coming up to rest on his chest, the kiss deepened. It wasn't a firework-filled movie scream kiss. It was better. It was slow and warm and solid, like the man himself. It tasted of hope and cheeseburgers and the promise of a new beginning. It was a kiss that didn't take, it gave. It was a kiss that felt like coming home. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathless. He rested his forehead against hers, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. "The ground is definitely shaking," he whispered, his voice husky. She let out a shaky, happy laugh. "I thought that was just my driveway." He walked her up the steep gravel slope, his hand holding hers, his strong, calloused fingers laced through hers. It felt right. It felt safe. On her small, slightly lopsided porch, under the dim glow of the yellow bug light, he stopped. He didn't kiss her again. He just squeezed her hand. "Get some rest, Max Harper," he said softly. "You too, Rowan Jacobs." She watched him walk back down to his truck before letting herself inside. She leaned against the closed door, her lips still tingling, her heart a wild, happy drum against her ribs. She looked around her little home. The boxes didn't seem so daunting. The peeling paint didn't seem so bad. The whole place seemed to be humming with a new energy, a new possibility. The voice in her head, the one that had been her constant, sarcastic companion through so much darkness, was quiet for a long moment. When it finally spoke, it wasn't the cynical comedian or the frantic MC. It was a voice she hadn't heard in a very long time. It was a voice that sounded an awful lot like her own. "Okay," it whispered, a note of pure, unadulterated awe in its tone. "Okay, I think we're going to be okay." Chapter 7. The following week was, in a word, disconcerting. Not in a bad way. It was disconcerting in the way that walking out of a dark, cramped cave into a sun-drenched meadow is disconcerting. It was too bright, too quiet, too nice. Max kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for a hidden tripwire, for an anvil to fall from the sky, cartoon style. But the days unfolded with a simple, steady goodness that left her inner comedian completely flummoxed. And here we are, live from Harmony Creek, where absolutely nothing is going wrong, her internal MC announced, sounding bored. Our protagonist's ex-boyfriend has seemingly vanished from the face of the earth. Her new love interest is both emotionally available and handy with a toolbox, and her job is suddenly free of psychological warfare. It's a real snooze fest, folks. We've had more dramatic tension trying to open a stubborn jar of pickles. Tune in tomorrow when we watch paint dry. Literally, Max is painting her bathroom. It was true. On Saturday, Rowan had shown up at her door with 2 paint rollers, a gallon of paint called sea salt, and a bag of cheeseburgers from the Hungry Heifer. They spent the day transforming her dingy, beige bathroom into a bright, airy space, their work punctuated by easy laughter and the occasional paint-smudged kiss. He didn't try to take over. He didn't criticize her technique. He just put on an old Tom Petty station, tied a bandana around his head, and helped her build a small piece of her new life. It was so normal, it felt revolutionary. At the office, the atmosphere was transformed. Tanner's absence was a physical presence, a vacuum where a toxic cloud used to be. The air was cleaner. Bob Henderson was practically giddy, lost in a world of cruise ship itineraries and retirement plans. He treated Rowan with a mixture of paternal pride and hero worship, and Rowan, in turn, treated Bob with a gentle, patient respect that only made Max's heart ache in the best possible way. He and Max fell into a comfortable professional rhythm. He'd stop by her desk to ask her opinion on a supplier's estimate or to have her look over a preliminary budget for a new project. He valued her input. He listened to her. He'd bring her coffee in the mornings, and his knuckles would brush hers as he handed her the cup, a small, private current passing between them that no one else could see. It was a secret, shared world blooming in the middle of Henderson construction. The ground was no longer shaking. It had settled into something solid, something she felt she could stand on without fear of it crumbling beneath her. On Thursday afternoon, Rowan called her into Bob's office. He had a massive, detailed map of Harmony Creek spread across the desk, held down at the corners by coffee mugs and a stapler. He had his cap on backwards, a sure sign that he was in deep thought mode. "Okay, show me again," he said, handing her a red marker. "The main water lines. Where are the oldest sections?" Max leaned over the map, the faint, clean scent of his laundry detergent filling her senses. She traced a path with the marker. "Right here," she said, her finger tapping a residential area just west of the town square. "This whole section is cast iron from the 1950s. Every time we get a hard freeze, a pipe bursts. It's a nightmare for the town, and it's a constant, unpredictable expense." "Right," he murmured, his eyes following her finger, his brow furrowed in concentration. "So if we're going to build the new community center on the Mill Creek parcel, we'd need to upgrade this entire infrastructure first. It's the only responsible way to do it." He looked up at her, his hazel eyes bright with an enthusiasm that was infectious. "Max, this isn't just about building a few houses. This is about revitalizing the whole town. New infrastructure, a community hub, maybe even a small business incubator space. We could bring jobs here, real sustainable growth." She felt a swell of pride and excitement. He wasn't just a developer looking to make a quick buck. He had a vision, a good one, and he was including her in it. "That's amazing, Rowan," she said, genuinely moved. "It's a big lift," he admitted, running a hand through his sandy hair. "And the town council can be skeptical. They've been burned by fast-talking developers before. I need the presentation to be perfect, airtight. Which is why I'm bringing in the big guns." "The big guns?" "An architect I work with. She's one of the best, specializes in sustainable design and community-focused projects. She can create renderings that will make this whole thing feel real to them. Her name is Adriana Thorne. She's flying in from Chicago tomorrow." The name sounded like it should be embossed on expensive letterhead. Adriana Thorne. It was a sleek, sharp, elegant name. A name that probably owned multiple pairs of shoes that weren't sensible flats. "Tonight's special guest star, Adriana Thorne," her comedian announced, suddenly appearing under a spotlight. "She's brilliant, she's from the big city, and her name sounds like a luxury car. Will she be our hero's plucky sidekick or a femme fatale in a tastefully tailored pantsuit? Place your bets." "That's great," Max said, pushing the ridiculous thought away. "It sounds like a smart move." "She's the smartest," Rowan said with an easy grin. "We've been through a few battles together. She'll be here for a couple of weeks to survey the site and work up the initial plans. I was thinking we could all have dinner Saturday night. You, me, and Adriana, so you two can meet. I want my two best people on the same page." His two best people. The phrase was a warm blanket on a cold day. She, the small-town bookkeeper, and Adriana Thorne, the big city architectural genius, equals. "I'd love that," she said, and she meant it. The next day, Friday, was buzzing with a new energy. Bob was excited about the prospect of seeing real architectural renderings of his company's swan song. Rowan was a tightly coiled bundle of productive energy, taking calls, checking survey maps, and occasionally catching Max's eye across the office to share a quick conspiratorial smile. Just after lunch, Max needed to run to the bank for the weekly deposit. As she was leaving the small brick building on the town square, a sleek black BMW pulled up to the curb. She recognized it instantly. Tanner. Her stomach clenched. He hadn't been to the office since his humiliation, and she'd foolishly started to hope he'd crawled back to his condo at the lake for good. He got out of the car, looking as impeccable and predatory as ever. He saw her, and a slow, unpleasant smirk spread across his face. He was blocking her path to her car. "Maxine," he said, his voice oozing a false cordiality. "Fancy meeting you here. Enjoying your new position as the big man's pet project?" Ah, the villain returns, her inner voice sighed dramatically. He's back from his evil plotting sabbatical, and he's ready for round 2. Let's hope he's as bad at this as he was at round 1. "I'm just doing my job, Tanner," she said, trying to step around him. He shifted, blocking her again. "I'm sure you are," he sneered. "Speaking of which, I heard Rowan's bringing in his star player. Adriana Thorne, isn't it? I ran into her at a conference in Chicago last year. Absolutely brilliant woman. And gorgeous. The kind of woman who commands a room just by walking into it." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, his eyes raking over her simple blouse and trousers with clinical disdain. They were quite the team, you know, back in the day. Built half of that new development outside of Springfield. People said they were inseparable, professionally and otherwise. It was a classic Tanner attack, a cruise missile of insinuation wrapped in a compliment for another woman. It was designed to make her feel small, plain, and utterly out of her league. A week ago, it would have leveled her. Today, she felt the sting, but the wound wasn't as deep. "That's nice," she said, her voice a cool, flat line. "If you'll excuse me, I have deposits to make." She pushed past him, not waiting for his permission. She didn't look back, but she could feel his cold, furious eyes on her all the way to her Hyundai. She got in the car, her hands shaking slightly, the familiar poison of his words seeping into her bloodstream. Inseparable, professionally, and otherwise? Adriana Thorne arrived at the restaurant precisely at 7 o'clock. Max and Rowan were already seated in a booth at the Miller's Perch. Adriana didn't walk, she glided. She was tall and slender, with a cascade of glossy dark hair cut in a severe chic bob. She wore a simple black dress that looked both ridiculously comfortable and astronomically expensive. Her only jewelry was a pair of geometric silver earrings that framed a face with high cheekbones, intelligent dark eyes, and a cool, confident smile. She was, as Tanner had so helpfully pointed out, gorgeous. "Rowan, you beautiful brute," she said, her voice a low, husky alto. She leaned down and kissed the air next to his cheek. "You dragged me all the way to the middle of nowhere. This better be good." "It's good to see you too, Aid," Rowan laughed, standing to hug her. It was a familiar, comfortable hug. "Adriana, this is Maxine Harper, the brains of the operation I was telling you about. Max, this is Adriana Thorne." "A pleasure to meet you, Max," Adriana said, extending a hand. Her handshake was firm, her nails perfectly manicured. "Rowan has told me so much about you. He said you're the only one who knows where all the bodies are buried, financially speaking." Her smile was friendly, but her eyes were sharp, analytical. They did a quick professional sweep of Max, from her floral dress to her wedge sandals, taking in every detail. Max suddenly felt rumpled, provincial, and overwhelmingly floral. The dinner was a masterclass in feeling like a third wheel. It wasn't that Rowan or Adriana were intentionally excluding her. It was that they had years of shared history, a language of inside jokes and professional shorthand that she couldn't hope to penetrate. They talked about the disaster at the Dayton site, the miracle of the Springfield zoning variants, and laughed about someone named Old Man Fitzwilliam and his obsession with gargoyles. Rowan, to his credit, tried to include her. "Max knows all about Harmony Creek's zoning quirks," he'd say. And Adriana would turn her cool, intelligent gaze on Max. "Oh, really? Is the council still beholden to the Historical Society? We had a similar issue in Galena." She would then launch into a fascinating, highly technical explanation of how she'd solved the problem, leaving Max with nothing to add but a polite, "Wow, that's impressive." Adriana was brilliant. There was no denying it. She pulled a tablet from her impossibly chic handbag and started sketching out ideas for the Mill Creek site right there at the table. "You see, Rowan," she said, her finger flying across the screen, "if we divert the creek just slightly here, we can create a natural amphitheater. And the community center shouldn't be one big block. It should be a series of smaller, connected structures that echo the local vernacular architecture. We can use locally sourced stone, passive solar." She and Rowan were leaning over the tablet, their heads close together. They were a team, a powerful, dynamic, impossibly attractive team. Max watched them, a slow, cold dread seeping into her heart. Tanner's words echoed in her ears. Inseparable. "And here we have it, folks," her inner comedian announced, her voice dripping with a familiar, bitter sarcasm. "It's the Max Harper Show, co-starring two people who are clearly the main characters in their own, much more exciting show. Our protagonist has been downgraded to special guest star. Her role? To smile politely and make sure no one's water glass is empty. It's a thankless job, but someone's gotta do it." "What do you think, Max?" Rowan asked, looking up suddenly, his face flushed with excitement. "Isn't she a genius?" Max looked at the screen. It was genius. It was beautiful. It was also a massive, multi-million-dollar vision that would transform Harmony Creek into something else, something bigger, sleeker, and more sophisticated. "It's a lot to take in," she said honestly, the understatement of the century. Adriana looked at her head tilted. "It's ambitious, I know," she said, her tone not unkind, but with a definite edge of big city pragmatism. "Small towns can be resistant to change. You have to show them that what they're gaining is worth more than the cozy familiarity they're losing. It's a delicate balance." The word cozy landed like an insult. It was the word you used to describe something small, outdated, and slightly twee. It was everything Max's new life was. Her cozy mobile home, her cozy little town. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. When the bill came, Adriana and Rowan had a playful argument over who would pay, a familiar routine that ended with Rowan winning. As they walked out into the cool night air, Adriana clapped a hand on Rowan's arm. "I'm going to head back to the inn and get started on some proper renderings," she said. "I'm inspired. I'll see you at the site tomorrow morning, 8 sharp." She turned to Max and gave her a polite, professional smile. "It was lovely to meet you, Max. I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of each other." She glided off toward her rental car, a dark, sleek sedan that looked as out of place in the gravel parking lot as she did. Rowan turned to Max, a huge, happy grin on his face. "Well, what did I tell you? She's incredible, right? This is going to be amazing." He was so caught up in the project, in the vision, in Adriana's brilliance, that he didn't see it. He didn't see the doubt in Max's eyes. He didn't see the way she was wrapping her arms around herself, a subconscious attempt to hold herself together. He didn't notice that the warm, solid ground he'd built for her had just developed a terrifying, deep crack right down the middle. "Yeah," she said, her voice sounding thin and distant to her own ears. "Incredible." He drove her home in a state of happy distraction, talking a mile a minute about passive solar and locally sourced stone. She just nodded and made non-committal sounds, her mind a maelstrom of insecurity and fear. He was in a different world now, a world of big plans and big city architects. A world where she, with her lopsided mobile home and her runaway Kenmore, was just a piece of the cozy, familiar past he was planning to build over. When he pulled up to the bottom of her driveway, he killed the engine and turned to her, his smile finally faltering as he registered her silence. "Hey," he said, his voice softening. "You've been quiet. Everything okay?" She couldn't do it. She couldn't voice the ugly, petty insecurities churning in her gut. She couldn't say, "Your friend is so impressive, she makes me feel like a garden gnome." She couldn't say, "Tanner told me you two were a thing, and I'm terrified he was right." She couldn't say, I'm scared your big, beautiful plans will leave no room for someone as small and broken as me." So she lied. "Just tired," she said, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "It's been a long week." He seemed to accept it, but a flicker of concern remained in his eyes. He leaned in and gave her a soft, quick kiss. It was just as warm as the first one, but this time she felt a chasm between them, a distance that his lips couldn't bridge. "Okay," he said, pulling back. "Get some sleep. I'll call you tomorrow." She nodded, got out of the truck, and walked up the gravel slope alone. She didn't look back. She closed the door to her little home and leaned against it, the silence of the room a roaring in her ears. The hope that had filled this space for the last week had evaporated, leaving behind a cold, familiar ache. The question wasn't whether Rowan was going to be okay. The question was whether he was still on her team, or if she was just another part of the local landscape he was about to develop. "Well, folks, that's our show," her inner voice whispered, the jaunty comedian replaced by a grim, world-weary narrator from a black-and-white film noir. The sun went down, the dame got spooked, and the hero was too busy looking at the blueprints to notice the cracks in the foundation. It's a tale as old as time, or at least as old as the last time she got her heart stomped on. Looks like the good times are over. Welcome back to the Valley of Despair. The view is just as pretty, but it's a long way down. Chapter 8. The bright, solid ground Max had been standing on for a week had turned to quicksand overnight. She woke Sunday morning with a familiar, leaden ache behind her eyes, an emotional hangover from a party she hadn't even enjoyed. The sun was streaming through her bedroom window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, but all she felt was a gray, formless dread. Her cozy fortress felt like a flimsy box again, and the beautiful valley view looked like a very long drop. Good morning, and welcome back to Max Harper's Life Choices, the show that proves that hope is just a four-letter word for future disappointment. Her internal comedian was back, her voice dripping with the bitter, "I told you so" sarcasm of a jaded lounge singer in a smoky dive bar. Last week, our girl was flying high on a cocktail of validation and cheeseburgers. But last night, she was served a cold, hard dose of reality, garnished with a chic black dress and a side of crippling insecurity. Today's forecast, 100% chance of self-doubt with scattered showers of ugly crying later this afternoon. She couldn't shake the image of Rowan and Adriana, their heads bent together over the glowing tablet, a perfect, powerful pair carving out a new world. A world that looked nothing like the quiet, lopsided one Max was trying to build for herself. Tanner's poison had found fertile ground in her oldest, deepest fears, that she wasn't smart enough, sophisticated enough, or whole enough, that she was just a temporary, small-town curiosity for a man like Rowan Jacobs. He called around 10, his voice cheerful and full of energy. "Morning, Adriana and I are at the Mill Creek site. You should see this place in the morning light. She's already got a dozen new ideas. Are you busy?" The casual "Adriana and I" felt like a punch to the gut. "A little," she lied, staring at a pile of laundry, "just catching up on some things around the house." "Ah, right. Well, I just wanted to check in. I'll see you at the office tomorrow." There was a brief pause, a flicker of something in his tone. "Everything still okay?" "Perfect," she chirped, the word tasting like styrofoam. She spent the rest of the day in a numb, restless state, unpacking boxes with no enthusiasm, the half-painted bathroom a monument to a joy that now felt borrowed. Every time she looked at the fresh sea salt walls, she pictured Adriana Thorne's cool, appraising gaze and imagined her dismissing it with a single damning word: cozy. Monday at the office was worse. Adriana had commandeered the conference room, turning it into a pop-up architectural studio. Blueprints were taped to the walls, foam core models sat on the table, and her sleek silver laptop was hooked up to a large monitor, displaying a rotating series of 3D renderings that were both breathtaking and terrifying. She moved through the office with an effortless authority, a whirlwind of creative energy in expensive-looking ankle boots. She stopped at Max's desk mid-morning, a sheaf of papers in her hand. "Max, a quick question," she said, her tone brisk and all business. She didn't sit, she perched on the edge of the desk, a falcon ready to strike. "I need a full cost-benefit analysis of using locally sourced Ozarks stone versus prefab composite panels for the community center's exterior, factored over a 30-year maintenance schedule and adjusted for projected inflation. Also, can you pull the town's utility easement records for the last 50 years? I'm looking for any unrecorded grandfather clauses. I'll need it by end of day." It was a staggering amount of work, but it was all work Max knew how to do. She was good at this. But the way Adriana asked, with the cool expectation of instant compliance, made her feel less like a valued colleague and more like a high-functioning piece of office equipment. And here we have the alpha architect in her natural habitat, her inner David Attenborough narrated calmly. Watch as she asserts dominance over the common bookkeeper with a complex request for data. The bookkeeper, sensing her lower position in the professional food chain, will now scurry off to perform the task, hoping to earn a small pat on the head and be allowed to remain in the herd. "Of course," Max said, her voice tight. "I'll get right on it." Rowan was a ghost, a blur of motion between the conference room and Bob's office. He was completely consumed by the project, his cap perpetually backwards, a look of intense, happy focus on his face. He'd rush by her desk, give her a quick, distracted smile, and say things like, "Isn't this incredible? Aid is a miracle worker." He was a man swept up in a creative tidal wave, and Max felt like she was standing on the shore, watching his ship sail away. The pressure mounted from all sides. The professional pressure to keep up with Adriana's lightning-fast pace, the internal pressure of her own screaming insecurities, and then came the physical pressure. The sky, which had been a hazy, humid gray all day, began to darken ominously in the late afternoon. An old-fashioned Ozark toad strangler of a storm was brewing. Max watched the clouds boil on the horizon and felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her gut. Her driveway. One good downpour could turn that steep gravel slope into a treacherous river of mud, making it impassable even for her little Hyundai. She left the office at 5, the first fat drops of rain splattering against her windshield. The air was thick and heavy, smelling of ozone and wet dust. By the time she reached the turnoff for her county road, the rain was coming down in solid, blinding sheets. She drove the last half-mile at a crawl, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, the world outside a blurry watercolor of thrashing trees and gray sky. She made it to the bottom of her drive and stopped, her heart sinking. It was already starting. The gravel was turning to a soupy mush, and a small rivulet of muddy water was already carving a new path down the center. It was now or never. She took a deep breath, put the car in first gear, and gunned it. The Hyundai whined in protest, the tires spinning, grabbing, and then spinning again. She slid sideways, the back end of the car fishtailing dangerously close to the ditch. For a terrifying second, she thought she was stuck. But then the tires caught on a patch of more solid ground, and the car lurched forward, clawing its way up the slope in a spray of mud and gravel. She didn't stop until she was safely on the level patch of grass next to her porch, her heart hammering against her ribs. She cut the engine and just sat there, the rain drumming a frantic, deafening rhythm on the car's roof. She was home, but she was also trapped. "Welcome to Survivor Harmony Creek," the game show host in her head boomed over the sound of the rain. "Our contestant is isolated, her only exit is blocked, and her shelter is a metal box on a hill in the middle of a thunderstorm. Can she outwit, outplay, and outlast the elements and her own crushing sense of dread? Or will she be voted off the island by a mudslide? The suspense is killing me." She made a frantic dash for the porch, getting soaked in the 10 feet between her car and the front door. Inside, the mobile home felt like the inside of a drum. The rain hammered on the metal roof, and the wind howled around the corners, making the whole structure groan and shudder. The lights flickered once, twice, and then held steady. For now. She changed into dry sweatpants and an old t-shirt, made a cup of tea with trembling hands, and crumpled up on the sofa trying to read a book. but the words just swam on the page. All she could hear was the storm and the frantic, fearful beating of her own heart. She felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. It was just after 7 when she saw the headlights. They appeared at the bottom of her drive, 2 piercing beams cutting through the deluge. Her first thought was Rowan. He'd somehow known she was scared and had come to check on her, his big F-150 more than a match for the muddy slope. A wave of profound relief washed over her. But the vehicle wasn't a truck. It was a sleek, low-slung sedan, a black BMW. The relief curdled into ice-cold dread. It couldn't be. He wouldn't. Not here. Not her home. The car stopped. The engine cut. And a moment later, a figure emerged. A tall man holding a large black umbrella, illuminated in the eerie glow of his own headlights. Tanner. He started up the driveway, his expensive shoes slipping in the mud, the umbrella barely protecting him from the driving rain. He was picking his way through the washout, a dark, determined shape moving toward her fortress. Max was frozen on the sofa, her teacup rattling in its saucer. This was a violation, a trespass of the highest order. Her office was one thing, her home, her sanctuary was another. The panic was a living thing in her throat, choking her. Code red, the comedian screamed from a bunker deep in her mind. The perimeter has been breached. I repeat, the perimeter has been breached. This is not a drill. The villain is at the gates. Man the battlements. Or, hide under the sofa. Hiding is a valid tactical choice. A loud, authoritative knock echoed on her front door. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a summons. She didn't move. He knocked again, harder this time. Maxine, I know you're in there. Open the door. I saw your car. I just want to talk. She squeezed her eyes shut. If she didn't answer, maybe he would go away. But she knew he wouldn't. Tanner never gave up when he felt his authority was being challenged. Finally, her body moving on autopilot, she stood and walked to the door. She unlocked it and opened it just a crack, keeping the chain lock engaged. He stood on her porch, dripping, his perfect hair plastered to his forehead, his suit jacket soaked. He looked less like a predator and more like a drowned rat, but his eyes were still cold and hard. "What do you want, Tanner?" she asked, her voice a reedy whisper. "I was worried about you," he said, his voice a mockery of concern. "Alone up here in this tin can, during a storm like this. It's not safe." "I'm fine. You should go." "Let me in, Maxine," he said, his voice losing its false softness, replaced by an impatient, demanding edge. "We need to talk. I'm not going to stand out here in a hurricane." He pushed at the door, and the chain lock went taut with a sharp clink. The aggression in the small movement sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through her. The fear was still there, but something else rose to meet it, a hot, protective fury. This was her home. "No," she said, her voice stronger now. "We have nothing to talk about. Go home, Tanner." He stared at her through the crack in the door, his eyes narrowed into slits. "This is about him, isn't it? Jacobs, and his pet architect. Did you really think you could compete with that, Maxine? With Adriana Thorne? She's in his league. You're a bookkeeper who lives in a trailer park. He's slumming. And when he's done playing his little rustic romance game, he'll be back in Chicago with her, and you'll still be up here on this hill alone." The words were a brutal, physical assault. He was articulating every single one of her ugliest, most secret fears, flinging them at her like handfuls of mud. The tears she'd been holding back all day pricked at her eyes. "That's not true," she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction even to her own ears. "Isn't it?" he sneered, sensing he'd hit his mark. "Look, I get it. You had your little fit of independence. It was cute. But it's over. The experiment has failed. Come home, Max. My offer still stands. You can leave all this behind. This dump. This whole pathetic attempt at a life." He was offering her a cage disguised as a rescue. He was trying to break her, to convince her that his gilded prison was better than her messy, precarious freedom. The old Max would have believed him. The old Max would have unlatched the chain. But the old Max hadn't wrestled a washing machine. The old Max hadn't been kissed under the Ozark stars. The old Max hadn't tasted what it was like to be seen, to be valued, to be part of a team. She looked at him, at his sneering, possessive face, and the fear and the hurt and the fury coalesced into a single, hard, brilliant point of clarity. "Get off my property," she said. Her voice wasn't a shout. It was low and quiet and vibrated with a power she didn't know she possessed. He was so surprised he actually took a step back. "What did you say?" "You heard me," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "This is my home. This is my land, and you are not welcome here. Get off my property. Now." For a long, tense moment, they just stared at each other, the storm raging around them. She could see a flicker of disbelief in his eyes, followed by a surge of pure narcissistic rage. He had lost control, and he knew it. He gave a short, ugly laugh. "Fine, have it your way. Rot up here on your hill, but don't come crawling back to me when he breaks your heart." He turned, strode off the porch without another word, and slipped his way back down the muddy drive to his car. Max watched until his taillights disappeared into the rain-swept darkness. Only then did she close the door, slide the deadbolt home, and leaned against the cool wood, her entire body trembling violently. She had done it. She had stood up for herself. She had defended her home. She had won. So why did she feel so utterly, completely broken? The adrenaline drained away, leaving behind a hollow, aching exhaustion. Every cruel word he had spoken echoed in the small, quiet room. He's slumming. When he's done, he'll be back in Chicago with her. You'll still be here, alone. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, a loud, jarring sound in the silence. She picked it up. The screen glowed with Rowan's name. A fresh wave of panic, confusion, and despair washed over her. She couldn't talk to him. Not now. Not when Tanner's poison was coursing through her veins. Not when she was half convinced he was right. What could she possibly say? She stared at the screen, her thumb hovering over the green accept button. The buzzing stopped, and the call went to voicemail. The silence that followed was absolute. Outside, the rain hammered down on her lonely fortress. And inside, for the first time in a very long time, the voice in her head was completely, utterly silent. The comedian had finally left the building. Max Harper was all alone. Chapter 9. The silence in the mobile home was a new kind of monster. For years, Max had lived with the loud, abrasive silence of Tanner's disapproval. But this was different. This was the silence of a vacuum, the dead air left behind after a bomb has gone off. The storm raged outside, a furious, impotent tantrum against her thin metal walls, but inside, the quiet was absolute. Her inner comedian, her sarcastic bodyguard, her frantic, funny companion through 5 years of emotional warfare had packed up her microphone and vanished, leaving Max utterly undefended. She sat on the sofa, wrapped in a threadbare afghan, and stared at her phone. The screen was dark, but she could still see the ghost of Rowan's name there. She had ignored his call. She had heard his voice in her head, warm, concerned, and she had deliberately, actively rejected it. Because what if Tanner was right? What if she answered and the man on the other end wasn't the hero who rescues washing machines, but a polite developer making a courtesy call to the local help before he flew back to his real life, his real partner, in Chicago? The risk was too great. The potential for that specific, soul-crushing humiliation was more than she could bear. The lights flickered again, held for a breath, and then died, plunging the room into a thick, disorienting darkness. A small gasp escaped her lips. The only light came from the intermittent flashes of lightning that illuminated the thrashing, waterlogged world outside her windows, turning the familiar valley into a stark, alien landscape. She was on an island, adrift in a sea of mud and rain, with her own thoughts as the circling sharks. She stayed like that for hours, listening to the storm and the terrifying silence in her own head. Sleep was a distant country she had no passport for. Sometime after midnight, the rain began to slacken, its furious drumming on the roof softening to a steady, mournful patter. In the ensuing quiet, a voice finally stirred in the back of her mind. But it wasn't the comedian. It was someone else, a grim-faced newscaster reporting from a disaster zone. This is Maxine Harper, live from the wreckage of her own stupid, gullible heart, the voice intoned, flat and devoid of humor. Sources on the ground confirm that our subject has once again mistaken basic human decency for romantic interest, a recurring error in judgment that has led to today's catastrophic emotional mudslide. The damage is extensive. Hope, which was briefly and foolishly under construction, has been completely washed away. The forecast for the foreseeable future is bleak, with a high probability of loneliness and a creeping suspicion that Tanner was right about everything. Back to you, despair. She flinched. The voice wasn't a defense anymore. It was an indictment. It was the prosecution laying out the case against her, and she was Exhibit A, the gullible, small-town fool. Morning arrived not with a sunrise, but with a slow, reluctant lightening of the gray sky. Max hadn't slept. She felt hollowed out, her body a fragile shell. The thought of facing the day, of going to work and seeing them, the dynamic, brilliant, inseparable duo, was a physical weight on her chest. But the alternative, staying here, trapped on her island of misery, was worse. It would be a victory for Tanner. It would prove his point. Her driveway was a disaster. A deep, muddy trench ran down the center, and the gravel on either side was the consistency of wet oatmeal. Getting her Hyundai down the slope without sliding into a ditch would be a small miracle. She put on her most sensible, waterproof boots, took a deep breath, and began the slow, treacherous process of escape. The car slid and fishtailed, the engine whining as she fought the wheel, every inch a battle. When she finally reached the solid, paved county road, she felt as if she'd just survived a natural disaster, which she supposed she had. The office was a hive of activity. The conference room door was open, and Max could see Adriana and Rowan standing over a large table covered in plans, their heads close together, their voices a low, intense murmur. Adriana was wearing slim black trousers and a cream-colored silk blouse, her dark hair swinging like a pendulum as she pointed to something on a blueprint. She looked as if she'd slept for 8 hours in a luxury hotel and woken up flawless.
Max, who had wrestled a mudslide before her first cup of coffee, felt like a swamp creature. She tried to slip past to her desk unnoticed, but Rowan looked up, his face breaking into a warm smile that felt like a slap. "Max, there you are. We were just talking about you. Did you survive the storm?" "Barely," she said, her voice tight. "The driveway tried to eat my car." "Oh, that's no good," he said, his brow furrowing with genuine concern. "I'll come by after work and take a look. We can get some gravel delivered, shore it up." It was the kindest, most helpful thing he could have said, and it made her want to scream. He was fixing her driveway, a practical problem, while the real foundation of her world was washing away, and he didn't even see it. He was a good man fixing a pothole while the city burned down around him. "A day, you remember Max," he said, turning back to the conference room. Adriana looked up, her intelligent eyes giving Max a quick, efficient scan. "Of course. Max, did you have a chance to run those numbers on the Ozarks stone?" There was no good morning, no how are you, just a direct, professional inquiry. Max felt a hot flush of resentment. "I have them on my desk," she said, her tone clipped. She spent the morning buried in the work Adriana had given her, the sheer volume of it a welcome distraction. It was complex, demanding, and she was good at it. For a few hours, she could pretend she was just an accountant, a valued professional, and not a walking collection of insecurities in sensible shoes. Around noon, Rowan stopped by her desk. He was holding 2 mugs of coffee. His cap was on backwards. "Peace offering," he said, setting one of the mugs down beside her keyboard. It was from her favorite mug, the one with a cartoon possum on it that said, "Live Weird." He remembered. The small, thoughtful detail was another painful twist of the knife. "Thanks," she mumbled, not looking up from her screen. He leaned against the desk, his presence warm and solid and utterly disruptive to her fragile composure. "Are you sure you're okay? You seem distant." "Distant?" her internal newscaster reported dryly. "Our subject is currently broadcasting from a separate galaxy, a cold, dark place where hope goes to die. Her perceived distance is merely a manifestation of the light years of emotional space now separating her from a man who is clearly in love with his impossibly chic architect. We now return you to your regularly scheduled heartbreak." "Just busy," she said. "Adriana's requests are extensive." "I know, she's a force of nature," he said, a proud, fond smile in his voice that made Max's stomach clench. "But look, I wanted to talk to you about the town council meeting. It's next Tuesday. Adriana is going to present the renderings. It's the big pitch. I need you there, Max. You know the numbers better than anyone. When they start asking about the budget, the tax incentives, the long-term economic impact, you're the one who can answer them. You're the one they'll trust. You're one of them." He meant it as the highest compliment. You're the secret weapon. You're the key. But all she heard was, "I need the local girl, the small-town bookkeeper, to stand next to the brilliant, beautiful architect and make her big city plans seem more palatable. You'll be the folksy, reassuring garnish on her sophisticated main course." She was a prop, a tool, a puppet on a string he didn't even realize he was pulling. "I'll have the figures ready," she said, her voice flat. He lingered for a moment longer, sensing the wall she had built between them, but clearly not understanding its bricks or mortar. Finally, with a small sigh, he pushed off the desk. "Okay, well, let me know if you need anything." He walked away, back to the conference room, back to the real work, back to Adriana. The afternoon was a slow-motion nightmare. Bob Henderson, giddy with retirement fever, kept popping out of his office to marvel at the renderings, booming things like, "Look at that Maxie, a regular metropolis. This Adriana is some kind of genius, eh?" Each word was another grain of salt in her wound. At 4 o'clock, Rowan and Adriana called Bob into the conference room to go over the final presentation plans for the town council meeting. Max kept her head down, her fingers flying across the keyboard, trying to lose herself in the numbers. But she could hear the murmur of their voices, the occasional burst of laughter from Bob, the confident, melodic tones of Adriana explaining her vision. After about 20 minutes, Rowan appeared at the conference room door. "Max, can you come in here for a sec? We need to nail down the final estimate for the Phase 1 infrastructure upgrade." She felt a wave of dizziness. She didn't want to go in there. She didn't want to be the third wheel, the human calculator wheeled in to perform a function. But she couldn't say no. It was her job. She picked up the folder, her hands feeling strangely clumsy, and walked into the room. It was worse than she imagined. The 3 of them were gathered around the table, a tight, powerful circle of enthusiasm. The screen on the wall showed a stunning 3D animation of the proposed community center, sunlight glinting off its virtual windows. It was beautiful, and it had nothing to do with her. "Ah, Maxie, perfect," Bob boomed. "Rowan, tell her what you just told me." Rowan's face was alight with passion. "We were just talking about the project management. Once the deal is finalized and you're enjoying the Alaskan wilderness, Bob, I'm going to need a strong team here on the ground. I was thinking Adriana could oversee the architectural implementation, and I'd handle the construction side. And Max," he turned to her, his smile so full of warmth and genuine belief in her that it was physically painful. "Max would be the financial controller for the entire revitalization project. You'd be overseeing a multi-million-dollar budget. It's a huge step up. What do you think?
It was a dream come true. It was everything she should have wanted. A promotion, a real career, a central role in the most exciting thing to ever happen to Harmony Creek. It was a golden ticket. But as she looked at him, standing there next to the impossibly poised Adriana, all she could feel was the cold, hard weight of the puppet strings. He wasn't offering her a partnership. He was offering her a better-paying job in his new kingdom. He was the king, Adriana was the queen, and she was the chancellor of the exchequer, a useful, trusted, but ultimately subordinate role. Tanner's words, a venomous whisper in her ear. He's slumming. When he's done, he'll be back in Chicago with her. This wasn't a life they were building together. This was a project, and projects end. It's a very generous offer, she heard her say, her voice sounding like it was coming from a great distance. Adriana smiled at her, a cool, professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. You've certainly got the head for the numbers, she said, but it's a massive undertaking. The financial oversight on a project this size can be all-consuming. We need you to be focused, 100%, no distractions. And there it was, a subtle, professional dismissal of her entire life outside of the office. Her lopsided home, her runaway appliances, her messy, complicated heart, all categorized as distractions from the real work, the work they were doing. The dam inside her, the one she'd been desperately reinforcing all day, didn't just crack, it disintegrated. A tidal wave of hurt, rage, and a profound bottomless despair washed through her. The puppet strings snapped. I can't, she whispered. The three of them stared at her. Bob's jovial face fell. Adriana's brow furrowed in cool confusion. Rowan's expression shifted from excitement to utter bewilderment. What? Rowan asked, taking a step toward her. Max, what do you mean you can't? She looked at him, really looked at him, and all she could see was the chasm between them. A chasm filled with his big plans, his brilliant architect, and her own broken, inadequate self. Her internal narrator spoke one last time, her voice a breaking, tragic whisper. And so the puppet, strings finally severed, simply crumpled. There was no grand speech, no final witty retort. The show was over. The stage was empty. There was nothing left to say. I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling as she backed away from the table. She dropped the folder she was holding, the papers scattering across the floor in a flurry of white. I have to go. She turned and fled. She walked, fast and blind, out of the conference room, past her own desk, through the main office. Max, wait! Rowan called after her, his voice filled with a desperate confusion. Max, what's wrong? She didn't answer. She couldn't. She pushed open the front door, the bell jingling a frantic, panicked alarm, and stumbled out into the late afternoon sun. She got into her car, fumbling with the keys, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fit the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. She slammed the car into reverse, backed out of her parking spot with a squeal of tires, and drove. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to get away. Away from the office, away from the plans, away from the pity and confusion in Rowan's eyes. She drove through the small town square, past the Piggly Wiggly and the Hungry Heifer, a tourist in the ruins of her own hopeful life. Tears she hadn't even realized she was holding back were now streaming down her face, hot and blinding. She was a runaway, a fugitive from a life that had briefly, cruelly promised to be beautiful. And as she hit the county highway and pressed her foot to the accelerator, she had no idea if she was running away from her problems or driving straight into an even bigger one. Chapter 10. The blacktop of the county highway was a slick, dark ribbon spooling out in front of Max's tear-blurred vision. She was driving on pure, unthinking instinct, her foot heavy on the accelerator, the engine of her little Hyundai whining a high, thin protest. The lush Ozarks scenery, the rolling green hills and dense stands of oak that had once felt like a comforting embrace, now seemed to press in on her, claustrophobic and menacing. She had no destination. She was just a raw nerve ending wrapped in a ton of metal, fleeing the scene of a crime she couldn't name but felt she had somehow committed against herself. This concludes our broadcast day here at KMAX, the station for all your self-sabotaging needs, her internal newscaster announced, the voice flat and weary, signing off from the smoldering ruins of her confidence. We leave you now with our regularly scheduled programming, a continuous loop of every bad decision you've ever made, set to the haunting music of your own quiet sobbing. Good night and good luck. You're going to need it. She finally, mechanically, made the turn onto her county road, her tires kicking up loose gravel. The drive that had been a treacherous mud pit just that morning had dried in the afternoon sun, leaving behind deep, ugly ruts, like scars on the landscape. It was a perfect metaphor for her emotional state. She navigated the steep slope to her mobile home, the car groaning and shuddering, and cut the engine. For a long moment, she just sat there, the silence of the valley rushing in to fill the void left by the engine's hum. She'd run right back to the one place she couldn't escape, herself, her fortress, her lopsided, peeling paint cardboard box on a hill. She stumbled inside, tossing her keys and purse onto the floor. They landed with a dull, unsatisfying thud. She sank down onto the sofa, the same spot where she had weathered the storm the night before, and stared at the opposite wall. The room was neat, the boxes were mostly unpacked, the bathroom she could just see down the hall was a cheerful shade of sea salt. It was all a lie. It was a stage set for a happy new life, but the lead actress had forgotten all her lines and just wanted the curtain to come down. Back at Henderson Construction, the silence Max left in her wake was a tangible thing. The scattered papers from the folder lay on the conference room floor like fallen leaves after a storm. Bob Henderson stared at the empty doorway, his mouth agape, looking like a stunned grizzly bear. "Well, I'll be," he breathed, finally. What in the Sam Hill was that all about? Adriana Thorne stood with her arms crossed, a single, perfectly sculpted eyebrow raised. Her expression wasn't angry or annoyed. It was one of cool, analytical curiosity, as if she were observing a fascinating but unpredictable chemical reaction. Rowan was still standing where Max had left him, his hand half extended, as if he could somehow pull her back through the sheer force of will. His face was a mask of stunned confusion and a deep, aching hurt. The excitement that had lit him up just moments before was gone, replaced by a cold dread. He looked from the empty doorway to the scattered papers, his mind racing, trying to connect a series of dots that made no sense. Distant, quiet, fleeing. It was a puzzle he didn't have the pieces for. "Rowan?" Bob said, his voice gentle. "Son, you want to tell me what's going on?" Rowan didn't answer. He turned and walked out of the conference room, his long strides eating up the space. He didn't stop at his desk, didn't grab a jacket. He just walked straight to the front door. "Where are you going?" Adriana called after him, her voice sharp but not unkind. He stopped with his hand on the doorknob and looked back at her, his hazel eyes clouded with a storm of his own. "To fix this," he said, his voice low and tight, "whatever this is." Adriana held his gaze for a long moment, then gave a short, decisive nod. "Go," she said. "Fix it. This project is worthless if the foundation is cracked." Rowan was out the door before she'd finished the sentence. The sound of his F-150's powerful engine was unmistakable. Max heard it long before she saw it, a low rumble that vibrated through the floor of her mobile home. It grew louder, closer, the sound of an approaching reckoning. She scrambled off the sofa, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't want to see him. She didn't want his pity. She didn't want his kind, gentle explanations that would only make the truth hurt more. She ran to the door and shot the deadbolt home, the metallic thunk an absurdly small sound against the roar of his truck. She peered out the small window in the door just as he pulled up beside her Hyundai, the big truck dwarfing her car. He killed the engine, and the sudden silence was more terrifying than the noise. He got out, not slamming the door, but closing it with a firm, controlled push. He stood for a moment, his hands on his hips, surveying the scene. The ruts in the driveway, the precariously perched mobile home, the closed and bolted door. He took off his Cardinals cap, ran a hand through his sandy hair, and then, with a gesture that was all business, he turned it around backwards on his head. Oh, hell. A small, terrified voice whispered in the back of her mind. The cap is backwards. I repeat, the cap is backwards. We have reached the final boss level. He walked up the slope and onto her porch. His knock was firm but not angry. It was patient, solid. "Max," he called through the door, his voice calm and steady. "Let me in." "Go away, Rowan," she said, her voice a pathetic, watery squeak. She was flattened against the door, as if she could hold it shut with her own body weight. "Not a chance," he replied, his voice just as calm. "We're going to talk about this. I'll stand out here all night if I have to. The mosquitoes are starting to come out, and they seem to like me, but I'm willing to make that sacrifice. Your call." There it was, that flash of gentle, infuriating humor. A single, stubborn tear escaped and traced a hot path down her cheek. She knew she wasn't lying. He would stand there all night. Defeated, she wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, took a shaky breath, and slid the deadbolt open. She pulled the door inward and retreated to the middle of the living room, wrapping her arms around herself as if preparing for a physical blow. He stepped inside, filling the small space with his presence. He looked from her tear-stained face to the defensive posture of her body, and the confusion in his eyes deepened into a raw, visible hurt. "Okay," he said softly, closing the door behind him. "Talk to me, Max. What just happened? 1 minute we're planning the future of this town, and the next you're running out of there like the building was on fire. What did I miss?" The dam finally broke. The words came spilling out, a messy, chaotic torrent of all the hurt and fear and insecurity she'd been drowning in for the last 48 hours. "The future of this town?" she asked, her voice trembling with a bitter, hysterical laugh. "Is that what we were doing? I thought we were planning your future. A future where you and your brilliant, gorgeous architect build your sleek new metropolis on top of our cozy, backwards little town. A future where I get to be your mascot, the folksy local bookkeeper you can trot out to reassure the town council, the local garnish on Adriana's sophisticated masterpiece." Rowan stared at her, utterly poleaxed. "Garnish? Max, where is this coming from? That's not—" "Isn't it?" She cut him off, pacing the small room like a caged animal. "She talks about my life, my home, like it's some quaint little inconvenience to be renovated out of existence. My world is a distraction from her real work. And you just stand there and nod, telling her what a genius she is. You two are a team, inseparable, I hear. You have your own language, your own history. I'm just the help. I'm the woman who's good with numbers, the one who can fix the books before you move on to your next big project in your next small town, and you'll fly back to Chicago with her and—" She stopped, choking on the last words, the ugly poison of Tanner's insinuation finally spoken aloud. The silence that followed was heavy and ringing. Rowan was no longer just confused, he was angry. A slow, cold fury was rising in his eyes, turning the warm hazel to a stormy gray. The long fuse had finally burned all the way down. "Stop," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had a hard, dangerous edge that made her freeze mid-pace. "Just stop talking." He took a step toward her, and then another, until he was standing directly in front of her. He was close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him, see the muscle ticking in his jaw. "A garnish?" he said, his voice a low, incredulous growl. "Max, do you have any idea what you are to this project? To me? You're not the garnish. You're the whole damn plate. You're the foundation. You're the steel beams and the load-bearing walls. Adriana is brilliant, yes. She can draw a beautiful picture. But you're the one who knows if the ground underneath it is solid. You're the one who makes it real. I don't just value your work, Max. I trust your judgment. I trust you. More than anyone." He took a breath, his chest rising and falling. "And Adriana? Yes, we're a team. We've worked together for 10 years. She's like a sister to me. A brilliant, terrifying, and occasionally exhausting sister who I would trust to design a building, but not to water my plants, because she'd forget they exist. Inseparable? Professionally, sometimes. Otherwise, that word came from someone, Max. Someone who wanted to hurt you. Who was it? She looked down at the floor, unable to meet his intense, searching gaze. Tanner, she whispered. Rowan let out a harsh, bitter sound that wasn't a laugh. Of course it was. He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently tip her chin up with his fingers, forcing her to look at him. He put that poison in your head, Max, and you let it grow. You let him convince you that you're not enough. And that is the only thing in this entire insane conversation that actually makes me angry. His eyes held hers, and the fury in them was slowly being replaced by something raw and vulnerable and fiercely protective. I am not Tanner, he said, his voice dropping to a husky, intense whisper. I will never be him. I don't see you as a project. I don't see you as a stepping stone. I see you. The woman who fights runaway appliances and stands up to bullies at the Piggly Wiggly, but doesn't know how to fight for herself. The woman with a stand-up comedian in her head who makes her laugh at the craziest times. The woman who looks at a lopsided box on a hill and sees a kingdom. He took her hand, his calloused palm warm and solid around hers. You want to know the truth? I was terrified of bringing Adriana here. Not because of you, but because of me. I was terrified she'd take one look at you, see how I look at you, and know instantly. Because I haven't been able to think straight since the day your Kenmore tried to commit suicide. Because when I'm with you, I feel like I can build anything. Because, Max, his voice cracked just slightly. You're the one I've been waiting for, the one who makes the ground shake. The tears were coming again, but this time they weren't tears of hurt or anger. They were tears of a deep, profound, and terrifying relief. Every ugly word Tanner had spoken, every insecurity she had nurtured, was being washed away by the absolute, unshakable sincerity in his eyes. Well, hot damn, her comedian whispered, her voice shaky but clear, stepping tentatively back onto the stage in the quiet of Max's mind.
Folks, I think the hero of the story just gave his big, dramatic third act speech, and I gotta say, it was a real barn burner. I'm actually speechless. Somebody get me a tissue. You can't just say that, she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. I can, he said, his thumb stroking the back of her hand, and I will. I'll say it every day until you believe it. I am not going back to Chicago, Max. I'm not going anywhere. I'm building a life here. And God, I hope you'll let me build it with you. She finally let go, a sob breaking from her chest, a messy, ugly, cleansing sound. She sagged against him, and his arms came around her instantly, holding her tight, his hand stroking her hair as she cried into the soft cotton of his shirt. He didn't say anything else. He just held her, a solid, unshakable presence in the middle of her chaotic world. He was an anchor in her storm. After a long time, her sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. She pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes, feeling exposed and exhausted, but also lighter than she had in years. My driveway is a mess, she said, the words ridiculously mundane after the emotional earthquake that had just occurred. He gave her a small, watery smile, his own eyes suspiciously bright. I know, he said softly. We'll fix it. We'll get a truckload of gravel, maybe even pave the damn thing. We'll build a retaining wall. We'll make it so solid, nothing can ever wash it away again. She looked at him, at his kind, earnest face, his cap still askew, and she knew he wasn't just talking about the driveway. He was talking about them. He was talking about her. And for the first time, standing in her messy, imperfect kingdom, she was ready to let him. She was ready to start building.